Chapter 67. Begging for monthly votes at the beginning of the month. Today's update is over 10,000 words. Give me those who have guaranteed monthly votes. Dongqing Wudi was in a hurry. This was something that everyone could feel. Li Tianlan was almost dragged out of the villa and out of the courtyard by him. Thunder God led the way, walking as fast as he could. The three of them quickly walked to an open space in the central area of the villa, and Li Tianlan was directly stuffed into the helicopter by Dongqing Wudi. The helicopter rotors roared up after a while and flew higher and higher. Li Tianlan, who had taken a helicopter for the second time in his life, was confused. He looked at Dongqing Wudi sitting opposite him and looked at him seriously, and then at Thunder God who was driving the helicopter. He was full of questions, but he didn't know where to start. Uncle Thunder. Li Tianlan was silent for a while. He didn't know what to say to the military marshal in front of him, so he could only turn his head and call Thunder God. Thunder God's rumbling laughter rolled through the cabin, and it was clear and deafening in the roar of the rotors. Don't worry, boy. I don't have time to catch up with you. Just stay here. Marshal and I won't hurt you. Don't you trust us? Li Tianlan smiled and said no more. For him, most people in the world could not be completely trusted, including Dongqing Wudi in front of him. But Thunder God was an exception. When he was 17 years old, when he walked out of the camp on the border for the first time, it was not his grandfather or any veteran in the camp, but Thunder God. Like today, he sat in the cabin and Thunder God drove the helicopter. It was dark outside the window. That year, from the southwest to the northwest, from the jungle to the desert, Li Tianlan slipped from the peak state. From beginning to end, Thunder God was by his side. The other party knew most of his secrets. If he had wanted to harm him, he would have had countless opportunities to do so every single day during that 1 year. In the past, he could give his life to Thunder God countless times. Today, facing Thunder God, what couldn't he trust? Li Tianlan's heart was steady, and his eyes were calm. Tianlan, you and Boss Qin. Dongqing Wudi, who was sitting opposite Li Tianlan, hesitated and finally said, How did you and Boss Qin meet? Li Tianlan was stunned and whispered, When I came to Huading, she was the first person I saw. Elderly arranged it? Dongqing Wudi's clean face did not change, but his eyes were tangled, and he seemed to be a little depressed. Li Tianlan nodded. He was not surprised that Dongqing Wudi knew his identity. Thunder God was Dongqing Wudi's bodyguard, so the marshal naturally knew what he knew. Dongqing Wudi took out a cigarette, took a deep drag, shook his head, and said subconsciously, How did you and her? Li Tianlan seemed to hear something wrong in his tone. His eyes narrowed and his expression became more and more indifferent. Seeming to realize that his tone was not right, Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly, looked at Li Tianlan and said, Tianlan, come and sit next to me. That's good. I'm airsick and don't dare to move around. Li Tianlan said with a smile and sat still. He was not disgusted with this legendary marshal of Xianxia state. Dongqing Wudi had a mixed reputation in the dark world. Some people thought that his approach was hot-blooded and heroic, while others thought that his approach was insane. But Li Tianlan thought that Dongqing Wudi's every move did not have too deep meaning. He was just bloodthirsty. Such a person was a homicidal maniac in small fights, and when he killed a lot, he would become a killing god. Dongqing Wudi was definitely not a good person, but he was extremely good to his own people. Ning Qianxing could make him give up the meeting of the decision-making committee and come to Huading with a phone call, which could prove this. The fact that the border guard corps was dead set on following him and advancing and retreating together with him also proved this point. He was not a good person, but he was a real general, a real commander. He was strong, iron-blooded, and domineering. For nearly 2 decades in Xianxia state, Dongqing Wudi alone propped up the backbone of the border of Xianxia state. Such a person, no matter what his international reputation was, at least in the eyes of the people of Xianxia state, he was a well-deserved hero. Li Tianlan couldn't feel bad for such a person, but now Dongqing Wudi looked at him in such a strange way. When he heard that Dongqing Wudi asked him to sit down, he subconsciously resisted. Dongqing Wudi stared at Li Tianlan for a while, and his eyes seemed to be a little sad. He nodded, looked away, and said softly, Your father and I are very good friends. There was a trace of indescribable bitterness in his tone. He saved my life and also saved the old master. If it weren't for your father, I don't know what the Dongqing clan would be like now. Although few people know about this, the people of the Dongqing clan will not forget and dare not forget. The Dongqing clan is willing to repay this kindness at any cost. Tianlan, can you understand? Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He instinctively felt that there was something wrong with Dongqing Wudi's words, but he didn't know how to say it. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi seriously and said calmly and sincerely, "From my standpoint, it's not a question of whether I can understand or not. We should thank the marshal and the Dongqing clan for their righteousness." Your standpoint? Hey, your standpoint. Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and seemed to lose all interest in talking for a moment. He shook his head wearily and said softly, "The reason why I took you to Zhongzhou in such a hurry is that the old master wants to see you." The old master used a favor from many years ago to invite an extraordinary person back, hoping that he can show you the way. Tianlan, seize the opportunity. Li Tianlan's heart trembled for no reason. Looking at Dongqing Wudi, who had closed his eyes to rest, he nodded silently and stopped talking. The helicopter shuttled in the air. It was dark outside the window, and only the sound of the wind whistled in the rotation of the rotors. Overnight, he tested the attitude of the academics and inadvertently walked into the Dongqing clan, the leading force of the giant group. The road ahead was dark. What would happen tomorrow? Li Tianlan closed his eyes. In his mind, there seemed to be footsteps from a distant place, echoing in the depths of his heart. It was very light and very fast. That was the footsteps of destiny. Zhongyuan Province. Luojing. It was nearly 4 o'clock in the morning when the helicopter landed. Li Tianlan, who closed his eyes to rest but didn't fall asleep, followed Dongqing Wudi out of the helicopter and found himself at the foot of the mountain again. In front of him was a neatly paved two-way lane, stretching all the way up from the foot of the mountain to an unknown place. The straight poplars on both sides stood by the roadside, making the road deep and mysterious. In front of the helicopter, a row of cars was parked quietly. Four dark Mercedes-Benzes surrounded a solemn car whose name Li Tianlan couldn't name. The headlights softly illuminated the road ahead. Around each Mercedes-Benz stood 4 burly men, all in black suits. They stood beside the light and shadow of the headlights and stood silently with their hands on their abdomens, but they had a steady momentum as dignified as a mountain. These were all elites, and perhaps none of them was lower than the ice-condensing realm. Li Tianlan observed silently and followed Dongqing Wudi to the amazing motorcade ahead. In front of the luxury car whose name Li Tianlan couldn't name, an old man standing in front of the car saw Dongqing Wudi coming over and immediately came over with a smile. He ignored Dongqing Wudi, just looked at Li Tianlan, and said with a soft smile, "Are you young Master Li?" The old man was slightly fat, with slicked back hair and neatly combed hair. He was dressed in a tang suit and cloth shoes. He was clean and his eyes were kind. It was easy to make a good impression. "I'm Li Tianlan. I'm not young Master Li." Li Tianlan smiled and said, "What's your name, old man?" "Henan. This is Uncle An, one of the old master's bodyguards in those days. Now he is the steward of the family." Dongqing Wudi took the initiative to introduce him in a calm tone. The light in front of him shone on his face, and no one could see his expression clearly. "Hello, Senior," and Li Tianlan reached out and shook hands with the old steward politely. Because of the mysterious and forbidden Dongqing Huangte, Li Tianlan was very interested in the Dongqing clan, and he also learned some superficial information from Ning Qianqing. Before Dongqing Wudi served as the commander of the Border Control Corps, it had always been Dongqing Hanguang, the old master of the Dongqing clan, who supported the family. The old master was also one of the marshals of Zhongzhou state and also entered the decision-making committee. In terms of status, he was one level higher than the current Dongqing Wudi. At his peak, he was the nominal second-in-command of the Zhongzhou state military, but in fact, he was the first in charge of the daily work of the military. In the military, his ranking was second only to the president of Zhongzhou state, and he was a real giant and a big shot. Dongqing Hanguang's bodyguard in those days could absolutely be said to be a real expert. "Don't stand on ceremony, young Master Li. Welcome to the Dongqing clan." Senior and said with a smile, looking very kind. Young Master Li, the old master and the master are waiting for you. Please get in the car. Uncle and Dong Wudi suddenly said, give me a car. I still have something to do, so I won't go to the old master's place. I'll go and have breakfast with him later. Senior and agreed with a smile and gave Dong Wudi a Mercedes-Benz. Dong Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, strode into the Mercedes-Benz with Thunder God, and drove away. Li Tianlan calmly watched the Mercedes-Benz go away. Under the guidance of Senior, he got into the luxury car of an unknown brand. Senior and drove the motorcade all the way up the mountain. The road wound all the way up, deep and calm. Occupying a mountain to be king. Such a word suddenly came to Li Tianlan's mind, and then he smiled bitterly. According to Ning Qianqing, the whole Zhongyuan province was the territory of the Dongqing clan, which was the real top wealthy family in Zhongzhou state. Now the Dongqing clan just divided a mountain as their headquarters. How could it be called occupying a mountain to be king? The motorcade gradually sped up. The noise behind them faded away. Lights finally appeared in front of them. A super-large modern villa appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. The villa was 4 stories high and extremely wide. On the quiet top of the mountain, lights surrounded it. The entire villa became more and more dazzling and magnificent. In front of the villa was a large courtyard that had been transformed. It was neatly and reasonably planned with gardens, rockery, pools, and jungles. The scenery was quiet, and the fragrance of flowers was overflowing. The night wind blew, wrinkling the pool, ruffling the flower beds, and ruffling the jungles. In a trance, Li Tianlan even felt that he had come to another world. He had been to the garden party, and the scenery in the garden party was also very beautiful, but that was a club. Here, however, was a private house. At this moment, Li Tianlan looked at everything in front of him and felt nothing but shock. Let's go. The old master is inside. Don't be nervous, young Master Li. Senior and took Li Tianlan out of the car and led the way to the villa. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was not nervous, but he felt a little uncomfortable standing in front of the top wealthy family in Zhongzhou state for the first time. In the courtyard, several patrols in black suits were carefully observing the surrounding environment. When they saw Senior, they all bowed respectfully. Senior looked indifferent. He took Li Tianlan all the way forward, pushed open the door of the villa, and went straight in. The decoration inside the villa was equally magnificent. But Li Tianlan's eyes were focused on the 2 people sitting in the small reception room. A gray-haired old man. A kind-looking old monk in a kasaya. The old man was about 70 or 80 years old. He was thin, and although he had white hair, he was extremely energetic. His eyes were even more majestic, and he had a kind of strong aura without anger. He was murderous and had the same origin as Dong Wudi. Li Tianlan confirmed the old man's identity at once. He was Dongqing Hongguang, the old master of the Dongqing clan. Although the old man did not have the title of God of Massacre, he was also decisive, cold-blooded, and cruel when he was young. The Dongqing clan had been like this since the beginning. Every generation was bloodthirsty, and Dong Wudi's generation could be said to have reached the peak. As for the monk beside the old man, Li Tianlan did not know him. Master, young Master Li is here. Senior pushed the door open and said with a smile, looking at the white-haired old man in the living room. The old man had already noticed Li Tianlan behind Senior. His eyes were astonishingly bright, and he laughed and said, come here, let me have a good look. Li Tianlan walked over and opened his mouth, but did not know what to say. He could only bow slightly and said with a smile, hello, old master. What old master? Dongqing Hongguang stared at him and said, call me grandpa. I've been friends with your grandpa for many years. It's not too much to ask you to call me grandpa, is it? Li Tianlan was a little embarrassed. He subconsciously touched his nose and opened his mouth, but he could not say anything. Dongqing Hongguang did not embarrass him. His bright eyes became softer and softer, and he suddenly said, how is brother Li? In the blink of an eye, you've grown up so much. I haven't seen my brother for a long time. Grandpa is fine. Li Tianlan nodded. If he had something to say, he would never say much. In front of such a sophisticated big shot, the more he said, the more mistakes he would make. Dongqing Hongguang nodded and said with a smile, "Come on, let me introduce you. This is Great Master Wei." You may not have heard of this name, but you must have heard of the Great Soaring Temple, right? Great Master Wei is the living Buddha with the highest seniority in the Great Soaring Temple. Even the current abbot of the Great Soaring Temple has to call him martial uncle. The Great Soaring Temple. Li Tianlan had naturally heard of this name. It was a martial arts force with a reputation only slightly worse than that of Mount Shu and Jade Pool. It practiced both Buddhism and Taoism, and its Buddhist incantation of 9 words was even more powerful. There were monks and Taoist priests in the Great Soaring Temple. Although it was a temple, the current abbot of the temple was a Taoist priest. His Taoist name was Tathagata, and he was one of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State. Taoist Tathagata's martial uncle? This was a real expert. Li Tianlan bowed slightly and said softly, "Greetings, Great Master." Amitabha. Great Master Wei smiled and put his palms together to return the salute. Looking at Li Tianlan, he suddenly laughed and said, "Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Do you believe in karma?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and suddenly thought of Xianxia. The opening remarks of these two people were basically the same. "I believe it or not." Li Tianlan chose his words carefully and said seriously, "Great Master, can you see my karma? My karma?" Great Master Wei hesitated and put his palms together without saying a word. He seemed to be in a dilemma. "Great Master, just say it." Li Tianlan said directly. Dongqing Wudi had already said on the plane that the Dongqing clan invited an eccentric person today to show him the way. Naturally, he would not stand on ceremony. If he really met a master in metaphysics, it would be of immeasurable help to him in the future. "I see the karma of the donor." Great Master Wei raised his head, took a serious look at Li Tianlan, and then lowered his head. "Great Master?" Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly and couldn't help calling out. Great Master Wei hesitated again, lowered his eyelids, put his palms together, and said, "This donor has gone against the general trend and forcibly defied the natural order. I'm afraid he will die young and miserably in 10 years at most." 10 years at most, miserably. Dongqing Hongguang's expression changed dramatically, but he was not angry. There was only worry in his eyes. Xianxia of Taoism sect and Wu Wei of Buddhism sect could be said to be the real grandmasters of metaphysics in Zhongzhou State. The former was at least utilitarian, so it was easier to invite him. But the latter was a real free spirit. If it weren't for the fact that Great Master Wu Wei owed the Dongqing clan a karma many years ago, he would not have been invited today. But now he was invited, and the other party said that Tianlan would die miserably. What the hell was this? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly, but his expression did not change at all. He just said calmly, "Great Master, do you have a solution?" "Everything depends on God's will." Great Master Wei chanted the name of Buddha and said meaningfully, "Originally, the donor's fate was unsolvable and destined to be miserable. But about 20 years ago, the donor's fate was changed. I'm not sure what will happen in the future." Li Tianlan nodded expressionlessly, stood up and said, "I'll go to the bathroom." He got up and walked out of the small reception room. Senior N, who was standing in the living room, immediately came out and said with a smile, "What's the matter, young Master Li?" Li Tianlan nodded seriously. "Although I know it's impolite to say this, if possible, I still hope that the Dongqing clan will throw the old monk out." "Why?" Senior N's face froze. "Charlatan, pretending to be mysterious." Li Tianlan shook his head and said disdainfully, "His fate was changed more than 20 years ago? F***CKU, I'm not 20 this year. Fuck you." Sorry, the update is late. Today's 2 chapters are over 10,000 words. Please understand. Chapter 68. Great Master Wu Wei? A charlatan? Still pretending to be mysterious? Senior N was directly stunned. What was all this? Great Master Wei, the highest elder of the Great Soaring Temple, became famous even earlier than Xianxia, the eccentric of Haotian Taoism. In the past 20 years, Xianxia had risen to fame and was gradually becoming the first man in metaphysics. But no matter how famous Xianxia was, some top seniors would never forget Great Master Wu of the Great Soaring Temple. They could be said to be the only two metaphysical grandmasters in the world. Xianxia intentionally or unintentionally dealt with the top wealthy families of Zhongzhou State and the Hidden Dragon Sea. As long as the people who invited him were important enough, he would not be refused. At least, he could give a few words of beneficial advice. Great Master Wu, on the other hand, was truly free and unfettered in the world. He was a mysterious figure. Buddhism focused on predestination and karma. In recent decades, Great Master Wu was not moved by power or money. He almost walked all over Zhongzhou State. He was like a living Buddha. He was willing to talk about karma to ordinary people and to point out the right path for some promising young people. There was a saying in the top circle of Zhongzhou State. As long as it was predestined, the living Buddha would answer all requests. Great Master Wu had been famous for decades. Not to mention earlier, in the past 20 years, there were 4 people who were known to have received his guidance. 18 years ago, he advised Situ Tsangyue to go north alone. The hidden god of Zhongzhou State appeared in Mount Taibai. 15 years ago, he advised Hua Qingfeng, an expert, to enter Yuzhou. A Jura path split, the shadow sect rose in the capital, and Hua Qingfeng took charge of the security department of Zhongzhou State. Now, more than 80% of the guards around the big shots in the Hidden Dragon Sea came from the shadow sect. 10 years ago, Lu Shuanghua, a senior intelligence officer of the Prince Group, was hunted down because he was framed. He fled to Jiangnan and met Great Master Wu by chance. He was advised to take root in Jiangnan province. Lu Shuanghua lived in seclusion in Mount Lu. 8 years ago, he joined the Wang family of Beihai in a high-profile manner and established the largest civilian intelligence organization in southern Zhongzhou State, Jiangnan Society. 3 years ago, the Shadow Sting Force, the largest and most mysterious special forces in Zhongzhou State, was established. Wang Zhaoliang, one of the core members of the Wang family of Beihai and the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, went straight to the Great Soaring Temple on the second day he took office, just to thank Great Master Wu in person. 20 years, for people, for giants of the dark world of Zhongzhou State. Whether Great Master Wu intended it or not, no one dared to say that Xianxia had surpassed Great Master Wu in metaphysics based on the achievements of these 4. The words of these 2 were basically equivalent to prophecies. This was something that many people acknowledged. Over the years, Senior had heard many legends about Great Master Wu and seen many people's worship and admiration for the living Buddha. He had never thought that one day a young man would disdainfully say that the living Buddha was a charlatan. Was there something wrong with this kid's brain? Or did he drink too much tonight? Elder An's heart trembled. He didn't know what to do. This brat was too ruthless. He was definitely doing this on purpose. Among the people present, except for Li Tianlan, no one was lower than the thunder-shocking realm. No matter how low Li Tianlan's voice was, it could not escape the ears of Great Master Wu and Dongqing Hongguang. He said it to Eldarin, but it was no different from pointing at Great Master Wu and cursing. Tianlan, don't talk nonsense. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth twitched. He looked at Great Master Wu apologetically and said softly, Great Master, Tianlan just came from a small place and hasn't seen much of the world. So, if I didn't know where he came from, how could I say that he went against the general trend? Great Master Wu turned the Buddha beads in his hand and smiled kindly. Li Tianlan hesitated a little, turned around again, and walked back to the small reception room. He sat down opposite Great Master Wu and said calmly, Great Master, I'm sincerely convinced that I went against the general trend. But about the birth destiny, I can only think that you're talking nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang glared at Li Tianlan and hesitated to speak. Great Master Wu was indeed an eminent monk. He was good-tempered to a certain extent. He said with a smile, Why? I'm less than 20 years old this year. Great Master said that my birth destiny was changed more than 20 years ago. More than 20 years ago, I wasn't born yet. How could I have a birth destiny? Li Tianlan said calmly. When it came to fate, people would always think of some false theories, but there were still experts who could really grasp a trace of the trajectory. At the beginning, Li Tianlan really thought that Great Master Wei was a charlatan. But when he thought of Elder An's eyes and Dongqing Hongguang's performance just now, he was a little confused. A top wealthy family like the Dongqing clan couldn't be fooled by any charlatan. But the so-called birth destiny had too many loopholes. Benefactor, do you believe in destiny? Great Master Wei asked again the question that Xianxia had asked and he had just asked. Li Tianlan frowned slightly. In the villa of the Dongqing clan, his mood seemed to relax a little unconsciously, and his mood swings became more and more obvious. You don't actually believe it. Great Master Wei chuckled and looked at Li Tianlan. You don't believe in destiny, so you don't believe that someone has changed your birth destiny for you. Li Tianlan was silent. Just a few words about the mandate of heaven and the birth destiny had already made him dizzy. He looked at Wu Wei. Although he still didn't understand what he meant, it was obvious from his face that he didn't intend to say anything more. Li Tianlan picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. The slightly bitter and cold tea flowed down his throat and into his stomach. He suddenly said, Great Master, if I'm really doomed to die a horrible death, can what I've been asking for all my life come true? What did he ask for all his life? It was to let his grandfather and those veterans walk out of the border again. It was to let Zhuanyuantai of Kunlun stand on the top of Zhongzhou State again. It was to let the reputation of the god of war family spread throughout the dark world again. 10 years later, if he really died a horrible death, could everything he had been pursuing succeed? At this moment, Li Tianlan suddenly found that he could face the possible death calmly. But what he had been asking for all his life was what he couldn't let go of. Great Master Wei hesitated for a moment and finally spoke in a concise tone. Li Tianlan laughed, and his eyes were bright without any haze. So, although I'm not reconciled to it, it's not too bad. It's worth it. The old monk took a deep look at him and didn't speak. You're so young. What's worth it? Don't talk nonsense here. Dongqing Hongguang's face darkened, and he reprimanded Li Tianlan mercilessly. His white hair was flying, his eyes were sharp, and his momentum soared in an instant. Li Tianlan didn't feel warm in his heart. Although it was the first time they met, the old master's behavior showed that he really didn't treat him as an outsider. Great Master, if Tianlan's birth destiny is really changed by someone, what will happen in 10 years? Dongqing Hongguang stopped looking at Li Tianlan and looked directly at Great Master Wei. His tone was calm, but his eyes were earnest. Great Master Wei shook his head. I don't have any good suggestions. There's still a long time. It depends on Benefactor Tianlan's own luck. Dongqing Hongguang's heart sank. Although he didn't hear any pessimism from the old monk's mouth, there was no optimism either. Dongqing Hongguang was a little worried about gains and losses. He didn't give up and asked, Is there really no solution? Return to the mountains and forests and don't care about the world. Great Master Wei turned the Buddha beads in his hand and said calmly. Dongqing Hongguang gave a wry smile and glanced at Li Tianlan. Sure enough, he didn't change his expression, as if he hadn't heard it. There was no difference between having such a method and not having it. I'm leaving. Great Master Wei suddenly stood up, looked at Dongqing Hongguang, and said with a smile, You and I are destined to meet in this life. If you don't mind, how about giving me a ride? Li Tianlan, who was about to get up and see the old monk off when he heard that the old monk was going to leave, stopped and sat back on the sofa. It was obvious that the old monk wanted to talk to Dongqing Hongguang alone. Dongqing Hongguang was a little hesitant, not about whether to see him off, but about whether to let the old monk go down the mountain. Great Master Wei was elusive. This time, the Dongqing clan could invite him up the mountain because of a cause and effect many years ago. For the Dongqing clan, it was a great favor. But such a favor was exchanged for such a result from the old monk. Dongqing Hongguang was really depressed. He stood up with a wry smile and walked out of the small reception room with the old monk. When they were about to step out of the reception room, Great Master Wei in front of them suddenly turned around, looked at Li Tianlan, and said with a smile, I'd like to give you a piece of advice. I'm afraid there will be a disaster in the near future. You should be careful and prudent. Li Tunlan was stunned, nodded, and said sincerely, "Thank you, Great Master." Great Master Wu smiled and turned to leave. When he walked out of the gate of the villa, Dongqing Hongguang, who was unwilling, hesitated a little and finally said, "Great Master, is it a good thing or a bad thing that Tianlan's? Well, his birth destiny has been changed?" Walking in the courtyard on the top of the mountain in the deep night, Great Master Wu glanced at Dongqing Hongguang with a smile and said softly, "His birth destiny has just been formed. Now it seems that it's not much better. Destiny is not static, but there is a general trajectory. Changing one's birth destiny is probably the difference between 10 deaths and 9 deaths. It's not easy to change one's destiny against heaven and earth and fight for life with heaven and earth." Then, Dongqing Hongguang's face was gloomy. "Don't be too pessimistic. Now it's a narrow escape. Who knows what will happen in 10 years? Great Master Wu chuckled and said, "Donor Dongqing, I'll give you a word of advice. Let nature take its course and don't force it. As for Donor Tianlan, after he graduates from the Sky Academy, he can come to Mount Qingyun in Lin and be my neighbor. It's good for him." Lin was the capital of Xianxia province. Mount Qingyun was located on the bank of the West Lake. It was an excellent place with good feng shui. Dongqing Hongguang nodded and said helplessly, "I can see that the boy is stubborn. Great Master, what if he doesn't go? His birth destiny has been formed, and his destiny has been determined. How can it be up to him?" Great Master Wu smiled casually and reached for the car door, intending to go down the mountain. Dongqing Hongguang's heart skipped a beat and he suddenly asked, "Great Master, who changed Tianlan's birth destiny?" Great Master Wu paused and turned to look at Dongqing Hongguang with deep eyes. He got into the car. When the door was about to close, a faint voice rang in Dongqing Hongguang's ears. "I changed it. Thank you for 5447229 big yuanbao reward." Chapter 69. When Dongqing Hongguang walked back to the small reception room, he was obviously a little absent-minded. Li Tunlan was a little surprised, but he couldn't say anything. The hand on the clock was about to point to 5 o'clock in the morning. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang sitting on the sofa and meditating, Li Tianlan stood up and tentatively said, "Old Master, if there's no other arrangement." He didn't finish his words, and he couldn't finish them. How could he go on? In the whole Dongqing clan, he was familiar with no one except Thunder God. Now he faced the old master of the Dongqing clan alone. What should he say? Go back to Huading without any arrangement? It was too impolite. Moreover, the other party invited Great Master Wu to come and give him some advice. Although he didn't get any good words, the Dongqing clan's affection was obvious. It seemed a little inappropriate to leave now. But if I don't leave, will he arrange a place for me to rest? He doesn't regard me as an outsider. Li Tunlan thought he was a very reserved person and couldn't do such a thing. "Oh, I forgot you, boy." Dongqing Hongguang's serious face relaxed slightly. He looked at Li Tianlan with a hearty smile. The old man looked calm and collected, but Li Tianlan felt uneasy. The old man's eyes were so strange, as if he was looking at a treasure. That kind of soft and surprised look appeared on an old man, and Li Tianlan instinctively got goosebumps. "Come with me." Dongqing Hongguang patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder and went straight upstairs. Li Tianlan wasn't sure if the villa had an underground space, but the ground level was 4 stories high. Such a large luxury villa naturally had an elevator. Dongqing Hongguang took Li Tianlan into the elevator and went all the way up. Metaphysics is metaphysics. It exists, but it doesn't represent everything. I'm old, and the older I get, the more I believe in fate. But at the same time, I also believe in the saying that man can conquer nature. In the elevator, Dongqing Hongguang suddenly opened his mouth. He looked at Li Tianlan and said flatly, "Boy, I won't fool you. Great Master Wu is arguably one of the most famous metaphysics grandmasters. What he said is a reference, even a very high reference value. With your temperament, you shouldn't be depressed by his words. But I'm afraid you'll go to the other extreme. You have a long life. Don't really think you have 10 years to live like that. It's not worth it. It's just stupid." Li Tianlan was stunned. He really didn't expect that Dongqing Hongguang would say this to him. He smiled and said calmly, "I won't be affected by a few words. No matter what happens in 10 years, I have to do what I have to do." Dongqing Hongguang's mind was in a mess. He nodded and said no more. The words that the old monk Wu Wei threw at him before he left were still echoing in his mind. Li Tianlan's birth destiny was changed by him. 20 years ago. What did this mean? At the very least, he could guarantee with the lives of his whole family that this matter had absolutely nothing to do with the Li family. Then how did Great Master Wu Wei know about Li Tianlan? And it was Li Tianlan who had not been born. Old Master Dongqing was upset for a while. When dealing with this kind of metaphysics grandmaster, the most terrible thing was that he didn't finish his words, which could make people want to hack him to death. The elevator reached the 4th floor. Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and walked out of the elevator. On one side of the elevator was a row of small stairs, about 1 story high, with a delicate small door at the end. "Come on," Dongqing Hongguang said and walked up the steps. Li Tianlan followed silently and watched the old man open the door. The night wind poured into the villa. A vast and boundless night appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was stunned. Behind this door was not a secret room, but the rooftop of the villa. Dongqing Hongguang opened the door and walked out. Li Tianlan followed closely behind. The rooftop was large and clean, surrounded by white jade railings, exquisite and gorgeous. The wind was slightly strong and cold, which made people's minds suddenly clear. The light was dim as night and dawn alternated. Li Tianlan leaned on the white jade railing and looked around. Everywhere he looked, there was lush greenery, wide roads, dense forests, and vast plains. Standing there and looking, everything in his line of sight was downward. Only he was at the highest point, looking down at everything around him from the perspective of a bird's eye view. Li Tianlan was silent, but his heart was surging with emotions. "Tianlan, what do you think a man should pursue the most in his life?" Dongqing Hongguang stood beside Li Tianlan, lit a cigarette, took a big drag, and asked in a gentle tone. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. In this situation, he suddenly thought of a poem. Without hesitation, he said it. "When you reach the top, all the mountains are small." Dongqing Hongguang laughed and said heroically, "Yes, to reach the top, this is a man's life pursuit." He pointed to the mountain under his feet and said with a smile, "Tianlan, what do you think of the Dongqing clan?" Li Tianlan had nothing to say. In his heart, it was not a clan, but a mountain. The villa where Dongqing Hongguang lived was located at the top of the mountain. On the way up, there were some forks. Li Tianlan didn't think much of it at first, but standing at the top of the mountain, he found that the so-called Dongqing clan was more than just a villa under his feet. This was just the center. Around the top of the mountain, in different directions, there were villas with similar architectural styles. Li Tianlan was not sure how big the mountain was for the time being, but standing here and looking at it, the magnificent momentum was really admirable. The atmosphere of a wealthy family is well-deserved. Li Tianlan said softly, with a trace of longing in his calm tone that he didn't even realize. This was the first time he had come to the headquarters of a top wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. Everything in front of him brought him nothing but shock and desire. Dongqing Hongguang stopped smiling, but his boldness did not diminish. He said in a powerful voice, "This is my family, the Dongqing clan with hundreds of thousands of troops, the Dongqing clan with the power to lead a group, the Dongqing clan with nearly 20 large military enterprises, the Dongqing clan that can make dozens of senior military generals bow their heads, and the Dongqing clan with a market value of hundreds of billions." He patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder hard and said with a smile, "Do you want such a family?" The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth moved. Such a question was so rude that no one could be flustered. He took a deep breath and said softly, "It's a lie to say that I don't want it." Dongqing Hongguang looked at Li Tianlan with a smile on his face. He could clearly feel the fire in the eyes of the young man beside him. This almost fanatical light was called ambition. Every man should have ambition. "Then I'll give you the Dongqing clan, how about it?" Dongqing Hongguang said softly, but the content was earth-shattering. Li Tianlan's body shook violently. He looked at Dongqing Hongguang with a stunned face. You don't want it? Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly. His reaction was completely unexpected. I can't afford it, Li Tianlan said with a wry smile. At this moment he was really a little scared and even felt that there was something wrong with the old man beside him. Give the Dongqing clan to him? He couldn't think of any other possibility except that the old man was crazy. What? Didn't your grandfather tell you? You have an engagement with the Dongqing clan. After you marry Rushi, I'll give the Dongqing clan to you. Everything here is yours, including the border Praetorian Corps. Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Li Tianlan felt a headache. He knew that he had an engagement, but his old man didn't say with whom. When he first saw Qin Weibai and felt her deep love, Li Tianlan even guessed that Qin Weibai was his fiancée. The Dongqing clan? In Li Tianlan's previous impression, it seemed to have nothing to do with him. The appearance of Thunder God tonight connected him with the Dongqing clan. Li Tianlan had a vague guess in his heart, but it was just a guess. Now that he heard Dongqing Hongguang admit it, the truth of the so-called engagement was revealed. Rushi? Dongqing Rushi? Li Tianlan thought silently. He had heard of this name for a long time. She was one of the core disciples of Jade Pool and the youngest daughter of Dongqing Wudi. She had exquisite bone and was a 19-year-old expert of the fire-flaming realm. She was even one place ahead of Li Baitian in the ranking of the top 10 experts of the young generation. When Li Tianlan heard this name before, he had always regarded Dongqing Rushi as an opponent he might meet in the future. As a result, his opponent became his fiancée. This change was too big. At least, Li Tianlan couldn't accept it for a while. He lit a cigarette and took a big drag. His mind was in a mess. That's it. You still have a few days off, right? Stay in Zhongyuan for 2 days. I'll inform some old friends later. You and Rushi get engaged first and exchange rings or something. Isn't that popular among you young people now? I understand. You can get married after graduation. Dongqing Hongguang said quickly without waiting for Li Tianlan to react. He seemed to think of something happy and laughed strangely. His eyes were almost invisible because of the laughter. Well, sorry, old master. I can't be engaged to Miss Dongqing, let alone marry her. Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted Dongqing Hongguang in a calm and indifferent tone. Dongqing Hongguang's laughter stopped abruptly. You won't marry her? He seemed to be in disbelief and asked subconsciously. I won't marry her. Li Tianlan's tone was firm. Dongqing Hongguang stared at Li Tianlan, and his face suddenly became gloomy. He said coldly, You are engaged. My granddaughter is talented and beautiful. In terms of appearance, temperament, and talent in martial arts, among her peers, only the little demon girl of the Wang family of Beihai can compare with Rushi. You won't marry such a good match? Who do you want to marry? Why don't you marry her? If you dare not marry her, I'll have someone kill you, you little bastard. Li Tianlan touched his nose and smiled bitterly. Dongqing Hongguang's words were not polite at all, but he just didn't dislike it. He shook his head and said sincerely, Old master, I have a girlfriend, and I will marry her. Dongqing Hongguang, who didn't understand the situation for the time being, was stunned and said casually, Just break up. Don't talk so much nonsense. I tell you, you must marry Rushi. There is no room for negotiation. Li Tianlan said without hesitation. His words were light and breezy, but resolute and decisive. Dongqing Hongguang's carefully trimmed beard curled up. He was flustered and exasperated, staring at Li Tianlan with disappointment. Damn it, my beautiful and pure genius granddaughter will marry you, and the whole Dongqing clan will be the dowry. How dare you say no? He breathed heavily. At this moment, he really wanted to kill the little bastard. Even if you can't, you have to. The old man clenched the white jade railing in front of him and said, gnashing his teeth. Li Tianlan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He threw away the cigarette but in his hand, lit another one, and handed one to Dongqing Hongguang. He said helplessly, Old master, to tell you the truth, I have a little potential. If there is no accident, there will be no problem for me to enter the invincible realm. I don't belittle myself. In terms of value, I still have some. But the Dongqing clan is, after all, a family with a heavenly son. It is not worthwhile to take out the whole family as the dowry for a son-in-law who may become an invincible realm expert in the future, right? Dongqing Hongguang was stunned. Heavenly son? What heavenly son? Before he had time to ask, Li Tianlan continued, and my identity is sensitive. This secret can't be hidden forever. Once others know that I'm from the Li family, I'm afraid the Dongqing clan will also face pressure. The Prince Group, Kunlun City, and even the Wang family of Beihai will probably be eager to attack me. My identity is now a big quagmire. Once it is exposed, it is easy to involve the people around me. On the contrary, the Dongqing clan is already so large. Even if I enter the invincible realm, I will not be of much help to the Dongqing clan. This kind of engagement is immature. Not only can I not help you, but I will also drag you down. Oh master, why do you insist? What nonsense is this? Dongqing Hongguang frowned and repeated the old tune. He was so persistent that it made people cry. You have an engagement with my granddaughter, so you must get married. The Dongqing clan at least needs its face, and it can't do something like putting the whole clan on the line just to win you over. The Dongqing clan will be you and Rushi in the future. It has nothing to do with winning you over. This is an engagement, understand? The Dongqing clan keeps its promise. We repay kindness with kindness. This has nothing to do with your background or your potential. These words were said with confidence, but Li Tianlan instinctively chose not to believe it. He silently smoked and whispered to himself, repay kindness with kindness, repay kindness with kindness. Old master, what do you think of my father's treason? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Dongqing Hongguang's expression changed. He took a deep look at him and said hesitantly, the inside story of that matter is complicated, and many clues are unclear. I'm not talking about that. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the gradually brightening morning light in the distance and said calmly. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and immediately understood what Li Tianlan meant. He was silent for a while and whispered, Tianlan, do you have a knot in your heart because the Dongqing clan didn't do anything? No, I'm just asking. Li Tianlan shook his head. I'm not being polite. I can understand. The Wang family of Beihai, the closest comrade-in-arms of the Li family, could choose silence and give up. It's reasonable for the Dongqing clan to stand by. Old master, I was rude just now. Silence. Dongqing Hongguang was silent for nearly 5 minutes this time. He lit another cigarette and said calmly, I can answer this question. First, the friendship between the Dongqing clan and the Li family was very hidden. Almost no one knew about it except for the two sides. Second, that matter was of great importance. It was a game of the overall situation. The Dongqing clan represented the giant group. In that situation, the Dongqing clan couldn't represent itself at all. As soon as we spoke, everyone would think that it was the will of the entire giant group. He paused and continued, Third, if the Dongqing clan had an invincible realm expert, we would have to ask the Li family for an explanation afterward. Unfortunately, we don't have such an expert. Fourth, the Dongqing clan secretly helped the Li family. Tianlan, you'll see what we've done later. Now is not the time to tell you. As for the engagement between you and Rushi, it was made by your grandfather and me. There's no complicated interest entanglement. We've waited for so many years, but you suddenly told me that you didn't want to marry her. Who would agree? Rushi is my granddaughter. You have to marry her whether you want to or not. Li Tianlan touched his chin. There seemed to be something wrong with this picture. His grandfather said that the family with whom he was engaged was very realistic. But how could Dongqing Hongguang's performance be realistic? He was simply letting his emotions affect his decisions. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly moved. He thought of what Dongqing Hongguang had just said and hesitated. If you have something to say, say it. Dongqing Hongguang glanced at him and said that Li Tianlan suppressed the story of the Li family and the Dongqing clan. At the same time, he quietly shifted the topic of the engagement to a topic he had always been particularly interested in. As for the engagement, it was better not to talk about it. He smiled and said, Old master, Can I ask you about someone? Ask about what person? Don't change the subject, boy. Dongqing Hongguang took a drag on his cigarette, his eyes puzzled. Well, the Dongqing clan sacrifice you just mentioned, is it related to Senior Dongqing Huangtu? How on earth did it? Ahem. Before Li Tianlan could finish his words, Dongqing Hongguang coughed violently. He seemed to be choked by the cigarette. He coughed so hard that he couldn't straighten up for a long time. Li Tianlan subconsciously walked over and patted the old man on the back. He said with a wry smile, I just accidentally heard some of Senior Dongqing Huangtu's deeds. If you don't want to say it, then forget it. Dongqing Hongguang waved his hand with difficulty and said in a hoarse voice, Who did you just say? Senior Dongqing Huangtu. Li Tianlan knew that he might be suspected of rubbing salt in the wound, but he hesitated and said it again. Dongqing Hongguang straightened up and looked at Li Tianlan with a complicated look in his eyes. Li Tianlan braced himself to look at the old man, feeling a little creepy for no reason. I don't know the person you're talking about. Dongqing Hongguang finally said, There is no such person in the Dongqing clan. As for outside the Dongqing clan, I've never heard of this person. Chapter 70. Since coming to the Dongqing clan, Li Tianlan had encountered more accidents than accidents. He was a little confused about Great Master Wu Wei's claim that he changed his fate. Now Dongqing Hongguang told him that the Dongqing clan did not have Dongqing Huangtu. Li Tianlan felt a little uncomfortable. In terms of combat capability, Dongqing Huangtu definitely deserved the title of Heavenly Son. If such a person did not die, the reputation of the Dongqing clan could even catch up with that of the Wang family of Beihai in a few decades. But such a heavenly son died of siege and betrayal, which was definitely the most painful scar of the Dongqing clan. When Li Tianlan mentioned Dongqing Huangtu, he could understand and accept that the people of the Dongqing clan would be angry, sad, or in pain. But he did not expect that Dongqing Hongguang would say that he had never heard of this person. Of course, Li Tianlan didn't believe it. Not to mention how weird Dongqing Hongguang's reaction was, even Qin Weibai couldn't lie to him, and there was no need to fabricate a non-existent heavenly son to fool him. Was it a taboo in Zhongzhou state? Li Tianlan was thoughtful. What did Dongqing Huangtu's past and death mean? Old master, have you really never heard of this person? Li Tianlan did not give up and asked again. In the beginning, wanting to know more about Dongqing Huangtu was just one of his interests. But now, his curiosity was aroused. What on earth did he do back then? Even his own family members claimed that he did not exist. It was simply incredible. No. Dongqing Hongguang's voice was hoarse, and his eyes were blank and confused. In an angle that Li Tianlan could not see, he chuckled and said calmly, Tianlan, where did you hear this name? What else do you know about this person? From a friend, Senior Huangtu was besieged and died. Snap. Before Li Tianlan finished speaking, Dongqing Hongguang's hand suddenly tightened on the white jade railing. The jade railing was broken into powder in his palm. The powder slid down his palm, fluttered, and was blown away by the wind. Dongqing Hongguang was expressionless and pale. Li Tianlan shut up subconsciously. With the old master's reaction, it was obviously not appropriate to talk about Dongqing Huangtu. But this dead heavenly son had taken root in his heart and gave birth to countless possibilities. Anything else? Dongqing Hongguang suddenly asked. Li Tianlan glanced at him and shook his head. He suddenly thought, since Dongqing Huangtu was besieged and died because of betrayal, then who was it that besieged him? Who had betrayed him? Were these the enemies of the Dongqing clan or his own? Would the Dongqing clan have the same enemy as him? If the answer was yes, then Li Tianlan seemed to have found a way to take advantage of Dongqing Rushi even if he didn't marry her. In his sight, a black Mercedes-Benz slowly drove along the mountain road into the courtyard and stopped in front of the main entrance of the villa. When the car door opened, Dongqing Wudi and Thunder God, who had left at the foot of the mountain a few hours ago, got off. A very beautiful woman got off with them. Li Tianlan was stunned. Was this Dongqing Rushi? It didn't look like it. The woman looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. She was plump and beautiful, and her eyes were gentle. She wore a pair of exquisite gold-rimmed glasses, and a faint smile hung at the corner of her mouth. Her every move revealed a kind of steadiness and calmness. Dongqing Rushi, who was 19 years old this year, could be called a girl, but the one in front of him was a beautiful young woman. "Let's go down for dinner." Dongqing Hongguang glanced down and said in a low voice. It seemed that his mood was also affected by the mention of Dongqing Huangtu. Li Tianlan felt a little apologetic and followed Dongqing Hongguang downstairs in silence. Almost at the same time when they walked out of the elevator, Dongqing Wudi and the other two also walked into the villa. Seeing his father and Li Tianlan, Dongqing Wudi was stunned. Then he quickly walked over and whispered, "Dad." Thunder God didn't follow. The beautiful young woman that Li Tianlan had just met smiled and called him Grandpa. She glanced at Li Tianlan and nodded with a smile. Her smile was warm and elegant. It was a kind of pure gentleness that only women had, like a clear spring, sweet and irresistible. Li Tianlan's heart sank. Was it really Dongqing Rushi? There was something wrong with her attitude. Beside him, Dongqing Hongguang was in a low mood, but he didn't forget to introduce her. He said calmly, "Tianlan, this is my granddaughter, Dongqing Qiuqi. You can call her sister from now on. She works in Huading now. If you need anything in the future, you can ask her." "Hello, Sister Qiuqi." Li Tianlan felt a little relieved and took the initiative to extend his hand with a smile. As far as he knew, although Dongqing Hongguang was still in charge of the Dongqing clan, the old master was only in charge of the general direction. In fact, the patriarch of the Dongqing clan had become Dongqing Wudi. This top family that dominated Zhongyan was also prosperous, but Dongqing Wudi only had 2 daughters. The one in front of him was undoubtedly the elder daughter, and the younger one was Dongqing Rushi. Although Dongqing Qiuqi looked young, she should be close to 30 or even in her early 30s. Was it because Dongqing Wudi had no son that the old master gave the Dongqing clan to his son-in-law as a dowry? It seemed better to give it to someone from other branches than to outsiders, right? Working in Huading? Li Tianlan was a little curious. He didn't know what Dongqing Qiuqi was doing in Huading. "Hello, Tianlan. Let's exchange contact information later. You can call me at any time if you need anything. I'm not far from your campus." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and reached out her small hand to shake Li Tianlan's. She was a gentle and elegant woman who spoke softly and was very comfortable to get along with. Li Tianlan nodded with a smile. "Where's Rushi?" Dongqing Hongguang suddenly asked. "Why didn't she come for dinner?" The smile in his eyes flashed away. He chuckled and said, "Why? Is the girl shy?" Li Tianlan's body slightly stiffened. He didn't know how he felt about his fiancée, whom he had never met. Dongqing Wudi was also a little embarrassed. The dignified god of massacre of Zhongzhou state dodged the old master's eyes and whispered, "Rushi just returned to Yuzhou." "What happened?" Dongqing Rushi was a little confused. Didn't they agree? Why did she suddenly go back? Yesterday, his precious granddaughter said that she wanted to meet her fiancé. As a result, the fiancé came, but she left. What was going on? Dongqing Wudi became more and more embarrassed and subconsciously glanced at Li Tianlan. In fact, it was not that Dongqing Rushi didn't want to. Dongqing Wudi was very clear about the engagement between the two families. His daughter might be a little confused and nervous, but she didn't resist much. She even acquiesced. At least she didn't object to them getting along with each other for a while. He could only blame himself for being so excited that he accidentally mentioned Li Tianlan's girlfriend when he picked up his daughter. Then things became like this. In such a scene, his daughter was not jealous, but she must feel wronged. Dongqing Wudi's mouth moved, and his heart was in a mess. This matter might be a knot in his heart if he didn't deal with it well. "There's something urgent in Yuzhou, so I have to go back." She said that she would go to Huading to find Tianlan after a while. Dongqing Wudi gave a half-true and half-false explanation. In fact, Dongqing Rushi also said that she didn't want to get engaged too early. She hoped that she and Li Tianlan would get married after graduation. However, Dongqing Wudi didn't dare to say that. If he did, he might face the anger of the old master. Not only the old master, But Dongqing Wudi himself also couldn't wait for the marriage of the two children. Forget it. Let's eat first. Dongqing Hongguang was even more confused. He didn't ask more and walked to the dining room. The breakfast was depressed and silent. Li Tianlan sat down next to Thunder God and only cared about eating and drinking. Dongqing Hongguang was absent-minded. After eating a bowl of porridge, he didn't eat much. When Li Tianlan put down the bowl and chopsticks, he also got up and said calmly, "Qiuqi, take Tianlan to rest. Let him stay with Rushi. I'll call Rushi later to ask about the situation." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled gently, looked at Li Tianlan and said, "Follow me." Li Tianlan said goodbye to Dongqing Hongguang, his son, and Thunder God in turn, and then walked out of the villa. Dongqing Qiuqi waited quietly outside. When she saw Li Tianlan come out, she smiled and looked him up and down with a strange look in her eyes. She didn't say anything. Li Tianlan's heart ached badly. Did this woman think of him as a gigolo who coveted the power of the Dongqing clan? The corner of his mouth moved. When he was about to speak, Dongqing Qiuqi, who was gentle to the bones, chuckled and said, "Tianlan, treat my sister better in the future, okay? Otherwise, I'll deal with you. You're in Huading, so it's very easy for me to deal with you." "Big sister, I haven't even seen your sister. Isn't it too early to say this?" Li Tianlan complained in his heart and said casually, "What does Sister Qiuqi do in Huading?" "The mayor of Wudong New District." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and said, "Even your Sky Academy is also within the scope of Wudong New District. Although we can't control it, we can still exert influence." "The mayor of Wudong New District." Li Tianlan looked at Dongqing Qiuqi, who was smiling gently in front of him. He couldn't connect this position with her. In Huading, Wudong New District could be said to be the most important district. The mayor was usually a member of the standing committee, who was a senior official at the level of deputy governor. Moreover, it was a very high position. In this case, Dongqing Qiuqi, the second in command, was only one step away from the standing committee. He wondered if she was 30 years old this year. The Dongqing clan is really full of talents. It deserves to be a family that has produced a heavenly son. Li Tianlan sighed softly, but he was carefully observing Dongqing Qiuqi's expression out of the corner of his eye. Dongqing Hongguang refused to reveal anything, but Dongqing Qiuqi should know something, right? Dongqing Huangtu was her uncle? Heavenly son? What heavenly son? Dongqing Qiuqi was stunned and asked curiously, "Isn't His Highness Dongqing Huangtu a heavenly son?" Li Tianlan asked seriously. He knew he shouldn't ask this question, but he didn't know why he always instinctively wanted to know more about this person. Dongqing Qiuqi's face was blank. It was a real blank, not a superficial emotion hidden behind sadness, anger, and pain. She looked at Li Tianlan and asked curiously, "Who is Dongqing Huangtu?" When Li Tianlan walked out of the villa, Dongqing Hongguang also called Dongqing Wudi and Thunder God into his study. In the study, the old master finally stopped hiding his feelings, and his expression became gloomy. Dongqing Wudi coughed. Looking at his father's face, he didn't dare to speak, but just gave Thunder God a wink. Thunder God twitched slightly and looked at Dongqing Wudi. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, but the shape of his mouth was clear. "Damn you." Dongqing Wudi glared and clenched his fists, his eyes flashing fiercely. Thunder God immediately gave in. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang, who was sitting in the chair in silence, he took the initiative to say with a dry smile, "Godfather, Rushi really has something urgent in Yuzhou. Don't be angry. When she finishes dealing with it, she will definitely go to Huading to find Tianlan." "Not because of this." Dongqing Hongguang shook his head, suddenly looked at Thunder God, and said in a deep voice, "Lei, when you took Tianlan to the desert, did you say anything to him that you shouldn't say?" Thunder God was stunned for a moment and muttered to himself, "Something that I shouldn't say?" Then he shook his head and said with certainty, "No. Dad, what the hell is going on?" Dongqing Wudi asked, picking up the teacup and pouring a glass of water for Dongqing Wudi. "Just now, when we were on the rooftop, Tianlan asked me a question." Dongqing Hongguang frowned tightly and said in a low voice, "He wants to know something about Huangtu that year? Something about that year?" Dong Chengwudi's hand shook, and the teacup in his hand fell directly to the floor and broke into pieces. How is this possible? The expression of this marshal of Xianxia state, who could always be calm in the face of anything, changed dramatically, and he subconsciously raised his voice. How did he know about Huangtu? Dong Chenghongguang glanced at him and said nothing. Aren't you curious about what that kid meant by that year? Thunder God suddenly said, what does he know? He said that Huangtu was besieged that year. How on earth did he know this name? There's something wrong with this kid. Dong Chenghongguang whispered, and his face was gloomy, making it impossible to tell what he was thinking. It's not him who's wrong, it's Qin Weibai, and it can only be her. Dong Chengwudi suddenly said, Qin Weibai? Dong Chenghongguang froze for a moment, and then said, is it the one from Samsara? That's Tianlan's girlfriend. It can only be her who told Tianlan. Dong Chengwudi nodded. Mentioning Qin Weibai gave him a bigger headache. What kind of nonsense was this? The point is, how did Qin Weibai know about Huangtu? How could she know? Thunder God sounded confused. At present, it can only be her who knows. It can't be Tianlan himself, can it? Dong Chengwudi asked in reply. The study suddenly became silent. The three of them looked at each other and could see a trace of panic and fear in each other's eyes. Go and check it out. Dong Chenghongguang suddenly said, I'm afraid she knows more than that. Send someone to check it out. We must find out what's going on. Dad, I'll talk to her myself. Dong Chengwudi took a deep breath and said calmly. Dong Chenghongguang glanced at him and nodded. Be careful. Dong Chengwudi said, Dad, what about Great Master Wu Wei? It's okay. Don't worry. Dong Chenghongguang forced a smile. The name Dong Chenghongtu had almost made the three of them confused. If they told him what Great Master Wu Wei thought of Li Tianlan at this time, it would only make him more confused. The melodious ringtone of a cell phone rang. Thunder God froze for a moment and quickly took out his mobile phone to answer. No one knew what the person on the other end of the phone said. Thunder God hung up, looking calm. Godfather, Marshal, there's news from the desert. Dong Chenghongguang narrowed his eyes and said thoughtfully, Wang Shengxiao. Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, had been called a young heavenly son in recent years. He was about to break through the fire-flaming realm and enter the thunder-shocking realm. Wang Tianzong's trip to the desert with him attracted the attention of almost all the major forces. Everyone knew that there was a whetstone in the desert of the best quality for the fire-flaming realm. Whether Wang Shengxiao could break through successfully on this trip was what all the major forces were concerned about. Thunder God nodded. It ended in a draw. Dong Chenghongguang nodded and sneered without saying anything. He's not as good as Tianlan back then. Thunder God chuckled, his eyes pleased. I just don't know if the one in Kunlun City dares to go to the desert. Chapter 71. When the morning sun rose and the darkness receded, a fierce battle that lasted nearly 5 hours came to an end. Light and darkness alternated. In the battlefield that spanned thousands of meters, the sharp sword intent and the violent fighting intent had yet to dissipate completely. Yellow sand was everywhere in sight, rising and falling with the strong wind. A large area of fire and the yellow sand almost merged into one, burning continuously. The long night had just passed. The temperature in the desert should be the coldest, but the blazing heat spread to every corner of the battlefield, making people breathless. This was the Dead Sea of Xianxia State, located in the south of Beijiang Province. It was the largest desert in the territory of tens of millions of square kilometers in Xianxia State. The Dead Sea Desert was famous for 3 things: the relic, the poplar, and the prison. Many people knew that in the depths of the Dead Sea, there was the most mysterious and heavily guarded prison in Xianxia State. There were even rumors among the people, but few people knew the specific location of the prison. The prison was codenamed Impasse, and it lived up to its name. For the prisoners here, it was an impasse. There was no hope, no goal, and no fantasy. They could only suffer here day after day and stay in the boring and maddening environment until they died. There were no ordinary prisoners here. cold and cruel killers, ferocious mercenaries, terrorists, military spies, international thieves, and traitors. Every criminal had a relatively glorious past. Ordinary criminals were not qualified to be imprisoned here at all. The battle that had already ended took place near the impasse prison, less than 2 kilometers away from the prison. In the environment of yellow sand everywhere, as the sun rose, the yellow prison gradually merged with the whole desert. There was no distinction between them. The wind rose and stopped. The yellow sand returned to the desert. On the battlefield, a young man who looked very young struggled to stand up and walked forward. The young man was handsome and in his early 20s. He was tall and slender, and his temperament was steady and sharp. He deserved the reputation of an elegant child. However, at this time, the battle that lasted for several hours had just ended, and his image was obviously a little bad. The clothes on the young man's body were almost completely torn. His upper body was bare, with only a few pieces of cloth hanging on it. Bright red blood had already covered his entire upper body, and there was even a wound on his face that was bleeding. He dragged a broadsword in his hand. The body of the sword was simple and heavy, wide and long, and it was completely black. As he walked, the edge of the sword that pierced into the yellow sand directly cut a deep gully in his path. Just from this alone, one could see the terrifying weight of the heavy sword. His lips were tightly pursed while his expression was firm, and his narrow and long eyes seemed to still be burning with violent battle intent. At this moment he'd already thrown away his modest and calm facade, and he walked forward proudly amidst the vast expanse of yellow sand while emanating an arrogant and domineering aura that disregarded everything. He moved forward for 20 meters. He stopped in front of an old man who was lying on the ground, bowed deeply, and said softly, "Thank you, Uncle Hua." The old man was actually not that old. At most, he was less than 60 years old. His face was withered, and his black and white hair was greasy and messy. He was dressed in gray clothes that were loose and shabby. It was the most standard outfit of a prisoner. At this moment, he was sitting on the ground weakly. He looked miserable and miserable. He calmly accepted the salute of the noble young man in front of him and laughed at himself. "I'm old and can't fight anymore. I've wasted a lot of my strength over the years. If I were younger, you might not be my opponent." Uncle Hua deserves the title of the first in the fire-flaming realm. I didn't win this battle, and you didn't lose either. You deserve to be the strongest in the fire-flaming realm. The young man chuckled and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. For him, this battle was indeed a draw. Both of them were seriously injured. Although he seemed to be in a better state now, he was dozens of years younger than his opponent. If they fought to the death, the result would basically be mutual destruction. How could he say he won? How could he say he lost? The strongest in the fire-flaming realm. When the young man first heard this, he inevitably felt a little dissatisfied. But after the battle, he was so strong at this age and even suppressed him in the beginning. He was convinced of this kind of combat strength. He took a deep breath, put down the heavy sword in his hand, and sat opposite the old man. He said seriously, "Uncle Hua, how about going back to Beihai with me? In the future, I need you to guide me in my cultivation." The old man didn't even lift his eyelids and directly refused the tempting suggestion. He simply said, "I'm fine here. I stay in a small space of 2 or 3 square meters every day and occasionally come out to look at the sand. I've been used to it for so many years. I can't afford the glory and wealth of the Wang family of Beihai." The young man opened his mouth, and his eyes were complicated. He was the strongest in the fire-flaming realm, who could regard most of the peak of the fire-flaming realm as nothing. It was better to say that he had been imprisoned here for 20 years than to say that he had been locked up in the impasse prison for 20 years. Why bother? The young man smiled bitterly. The fighting intent in his eyes gradually faded, and his eyes gradually became gentle and clear. His whole person had a trace of gentleness that was inconsistent with the heavy sword beside him. He didn't look aggressive or aggressive at all. The old man didn't answer. No one knew whether he was unwilling or disdainful. The young man also fell silent. He had heard of the old man in front of him when he entered the fire-flaming realm a few years ago. Many people might have also heard of him. This was the strongest expert in the fire-flaming realm at that time. For many years, he had been the best whetstone in the eyes of some fire-flaming realm geniuses. But over the years, as far as he knew, it seemed that he was the only one who dared to use him as a whetstone. Whetstone, the young man frowned slightly. He didn't feel anything when he first heard this title. But when he saw the old man's current state and recalled the word, he suddenly felt it was a little harsh. How glorious was the old man back then! Known as the strongest expert in the fire-flaming realm, he had successively served as the deputy commander of the capital garrison, the deputy minister of the guard department of Xianxia state, the first deputy minister of the Ministry of Security, and the first deputy army commander of the border Praetorian Corps. He had followed 2 gods of war in Xianxia state. Whether in the era of Li Honghe or Li Guangtu, he was one of their sacred guards, codenamed Fireman. In the dark world of that era, he was more than famous. But now, he was locked up in the most mysterious prison in Xianxia state. Every day, he holed up in a small space of only a few square meters. He couldn't even stretch his arms and legs. Used to it? How could he get used to it? The young man sighed softly. When the war god family collapsed, the role played by his family could not be regarded as despicable, but it was not related to the bright and mighty. Fireman's inner obsession and knot were hard to solve, so it was reasonable that he did not want to return to the Wang family of Beihai. Let's go. Fireman suddenly stood up and said, and then walked to the nearby impasse prison without looking back. Brother Fire, this is a good wine specially prepared for you. Aren't you going to have a sip? A gentle voice sounded. It was plain, but as soon as the words came out, they reverberated in the whole world nearby and were clearly heard from all directions. Fireman stopped and slowly looked back. In sight was still the same yellow sand, undulating sand dunes as far as the eye could see. On a sand dune 1,000 meters away, a tiny figure that looked like a black dot stood up. In an instant, everything in front of Fireman seemed to disappear, leaving only the small figure in front of him. The figure took a step forward, and his figure became clear in an instant. The second step was taken. All the yellow sand nearby began to tremble and float. A storm suddenly formed in the desert, whistling and rotating around him. The third step. The storm was still. And he appeared in front of Fireman. This was a man whose specific age could not be seen at all. He had the steadiness of a 30-year-old, the vicissitudes of a 40-year-old, and the open-mindedness of a 50-year-old. He appeared beside Fireman with a chuckle. He was ordinary, but in a trance, he seemed to have become the center of the whole world. It was an indescribable taste. He didn't need any momentum. As long as he stood there, he was the momentum. A kind of momentum that was abundant and majestic enough to shake the world was like the coming wind and rain, like the dark clouds pressing down on the city, like thunder on the flat ground, like the surging tide of the deep sea, abundant and unstoppable. Sword Emperor of Xianxia State, the top expert of Xianxia State, the top expert of the World Divine List, Patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, Wang Tianzong. Fireman looked at him calmly without saying a word. Wang Tianzong raised the bottle in his hand and said with a smile, "Are you in such a hurry?" "He's in a hurry." Fireman pointed to the young man behind Wang Tianzong and said in a calm tone, "It doesn't matter." Wang Tianzong opened the bottle and said calmly, "All the land under the sky belongs to the king. Where can I break through? Where can I break through?" His words were calm, but there was a kind of extreme confidence between the lines. Fireman nodded, took the wine that Wang Tianzong handed over, and drank most of the bottle in one breath. The wine went into his stomach. The spicy feeling burned his heart and lungs. Fireman held his breath for a long time before he let it out. His face turned red and he said, "Good wine. I made it at home. Would you like to go back with me and have a taste? It's good enough." Wang Tianzong chuckled, his eyes deep. Fireman shook his head, glanced at Wang Xianxia, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai, who was already sitting on the ground and meditating, and said blandly, "No, he's about to break through to the fire-flaming realm and there's no need to go. It's really a waste here." Wang Tianzong said blandly, "In my impression, you're still the fireman who tried to go straight from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm. You dare to ignore the thunder-shocking realm and don't stick to the rules. Even if you're laughed at, you'll firmly walk out of your own martial arts path. You're not the miserable and decadent old man now. Brother Fire, come with me. There's still a chance now." Chance? Fireman took another big gulp, smiled bitterly, pointed to his face, and said, "What chance do I have now? I'm almost 60 years old. For hundreds of years, have you ever seen anyone who entered the invincible realm at the age of 60? For hundreds of years, no one has tried to go straight from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm and regarded the thunder-shocking realm as nothing. 20 years ago, it seemed that you were the only one, right?" Wang Tianzong's tone was still bland. But Fireman heard something wrong. 20 years ago, he was the only one who tried to go straight to the invincible realm. What about 20 years later? Do you think the path I took back then, can it be taken? Are there people like me out there now? Fireman asked seriously after a long silence. He might have a knot in his heart for the Wang family of Beihai, but for martial arts, even if he knew that he had no chance, he hoped to hear other people's comments and get their recognition. Now the world's #1 expert was in front of him, and he hoped to prove from Wang Tianzong that his efforts were not wasted. "I don't know." Wang Tianzong smiled bitterly. "Our paths are different. The path you took was unheard of, and even Senior Li didn't approve of it. If you don't enter the thunder-shocking realm, who knows what the real limit of the fire-flaming realm is? Your combat capability was comparable to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, but you didn't touch the threshold from the fire-flaming realm to the invincible realm, did you? How can I know if you don't know?" His eyes twinkled and he said thoughtfully, "But now there is a madman outside like you. He is an assassin. Half a year ago, he tried to go straight from the chi-controlling realm to the invincible realm. When he was close to success, he failed and almost went into chi deviation. I don't know the specific situation. Brother Fire, do you want to go with me to have a look?" He jumped from the chi-controlling realm to the ice-condensing realm, the fire-flaming realm, and the thunder-shocking realm to the invincible realm. It was not too much to say that such a person was a madman. Fireman still shook his head and simply said, "You said that our paths are different." Wang Tianzong sighed softly. Looking at the determination in Fireman's eyes, he didn't persuade him, but whispered, "Brother Fire, do you think there is anything that Xianxia can improve?" Fireman hesitated a little, nodded, and pointed to the yellow sand under his feet. Wang Tianzong immediately understood what he meant, shook his head, and said calmly, "Underground? It's not necessary. Today, the Wang family of Beihai doesn't need this method. Such improvement is tantamount to nitpicking, just like the invincible manual in the map of God of War of the Li family. When the Li family was at its peak, which God of War didn't think that the invincible manual was of little value. It's strong, but who is willing to practice it unless they are in a desperate situation? Now the Wang family of Beihai doesn't need its heir to take risks. The more stable, the better, not to mention the kind of risk of death or even death." Fireman drank the last sip of wine, nodded, threw the bottle on the ground, and turned away in silence. Wang Tianzong quietly watched Fireman's fading figure and suddenly said, "Brother Fire, don't you need an explanation for what happened that year?" "I can explain." Fireman calmly moved forward without looking back and said indifferently, "As long as you have a clear conscience." The muscles on Wang Tianzong's face twitched violently, and his eyes were bitter. "Brother Fire, do you have a clear conscience today?" He took a deep breath and continued to ask. "I've done my best today. What's there to be ashamed of?" Fireman asked in reply. Wang Tianzong let out a sigh of relief and nodded. "Thank you." Fireman didn't give in to Wang Xianxiao, which proved that Wang Xianxiao's fire-flaming realm had indeed reached the extreme, and he could smoothly break through to the thunder-shocking realm. He didn't need the hopeless cross realm to enter the invincible realm. Hundreds of years of facts had proved that step-by-step was the best choice. Fireman walked back to the prison in silence. From beginning to end, he never looked back. Behind Wang Tianzong, Wang Xianxiao's happy voice sounded. Wang Tianzong calmly looked back and asked, "How is it?" Wang Xianxia didn't speak, but just reached out his hand. A dazzling electric light bloomed in his hand, and there was a faint thunder in the air. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes and nodded. "Let's go. There's one more thing to do. After that, we'll go to Huading. Your sister found a very good young man with wind and thunder veins like you. I want to meet him. Is that the brother who saved Yue Dong's life? You should thank him." Wang Xianxia laughed, and his tone was calm and confident. Wang Tianzong nodded and glanced at Fireman's back again, expressionless. "Let's go." He turned around and left directly. "Dad, where are we going now?" "Kunlun City." The figures of the father and son gradually disappeared. Fireman, who had never looked back, also came to the gate of the prison. The gate of the prison was made entirely of alloy, with a password, which looked extremely complicated. The prison guard entered 5 passwords in a row. After the 5th door was opened, a closed space appeared in front of Fireman. Fireman stepped in without hesitation. The space in the closed prison was narrow, and one road after another appeared in front of Fireman. It was a dazzling maze just by looking at the exit. "Turn left." Fireman walked slowly. There was blood flowing down the corner of his mouth, and he reached out to wipe it away. He lowered his head and walked forward with his mouth tightly closed, and his eyes were cold. Outside the prison, he told Wang Tianzong the truth. He had a clear conscience in this battle. But what Wang Tianzong didn't know was that as early as 2 years ago, the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in his heart had been injured in another fierce battle, and the injury had not yet healed. At that time, his opponent was a youth who was only 17 years old, a youth who was worthy of him putting his life on the line and everything he had to test. That battle also took place outside the maze. There was also only one bystander. The two fought fiercely for nearly 16 hours. Fireman was as steady as Mount Tai, but the boy broke through the fire-flaming realm and entered the thunder-shocking realm uncontrollably at the last minute. The boy won that battle. But fire-flaming realm against fire-flaming realm. The boy lost. For those who practiced the Invincible Manual, the outcome was so obvious and so cruel. On that day, Fireman clearly remembered that he stood in front of him, with his hands open and a bright smile. Fire and lightning kept rushing out of his body, burning and blooming. His realm retreated from the thunder-shocking realm to the fire-flaming realm, the ice-condensing realm, and the chi-controlling realm. In the large light and shadow, his smile was bright and firm, but he said lightly, "It's just starting over." In that brilliant and lonely light and shadow, the strongest young heavenly sun Fireman had seen so far destroyed his martial arts and started over. "It's just starting over." Fireman wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were warm. "Thank you for the monthly votes of a game of spring and autumn. If you have monthly votes, please give them to Special Warfare." Today's update of more than 9,000 words. Chapter 73. With tens of millions of square kilometers of land, Xianxia State was rich in resources and talented people. From an international point of view, everyone has a different view of the continent. Politically and militarily, Xianxia State was the most powerful country in the world. From the perspective of ordinary people, Xianxia State was the most mysterious and charming country in the East. In the eyes of the experts in the dark world, the vast Xianxia State, to put it bluntly, could be divided into 9 words. West Kunlun, North Taibai, Southeast City. In the hearts of the experts in the dark world, they were the 3 most powerful forces in Xianxia State. Kunlun City of Kunlun Mountain, Sai City of Taibai Mountain, and the border Praetorian Corps of Xianxia State. This was the backbone of Xianxia State's defense for the past 2 decades. It had been deeply rooted in Xianxia State for many years and was as stable as a rock. Other than the 3 superpowers, there was the Wang family of Beihai. This was a very special wealthy family in the world. For hundreds of years, both the Xianxia State government and the Wang family of Beihai had emphasized that Beihai province was a part of Xianxia State. But the fact was that very few people in the world thought that the Wang family of Beihai belonged to Xianxia State. This was a very strange phenomenon. The 160,000 square kilometers of Beihai province, from officials to military officers, were all appointed by the Wang family of Beihai. Even the top leader of Beihai province was selected by the Wang family of Beihai and then recommended to the decision-making committee. Among more than 30 provinces in Zhongzhou state, only Beihai province had such treatment. Even the residents of Beihai province would say that they were from Beihai instead of Zhongzhou state or Beihai of Zhongzhou state when they went out to places all over the world. This kind of strong sense of regional belonging was not uncommon at the provincial level. For example, most people from Guinness Island would say that they were from Guinness Island instead of Dongshan Island, and people from Gusu Island would say that they were from Gusu instead of Wuxia Island. But at the national level, in the entire Zhongzhou state, only people from Beihai province would say that they were from Beihai when they traveled around the world. This was the case even under normal circumstances. In the dark world, the experts would naturally separate the Wang family of Beihai from Zhongzhou state. It seemed that only in this way, when the experts of Zhongzhou state were mentioned, the foreign experts of the dark world would not feel so much pressure. Looking at the overall situation of the dark world, the most memorable ones were the masters on the divine and holy lists. The status of the God list could be said to be supreme. The holy list was second only to the divine list. There were a total of 30 people on the two lists, and they were the top big shots in the entire dark world. If Wang Tianzong of the Wang family of Beihai was added, 3 of the 4 invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou state were on the list, and all of them were on the divine list. The pressure was self-evident. If Wang Tianzong was excluded and the experts of Zhongzhou state were still extremely powerful, at least they would not make people feel desperate. On the same morning, when Wang Tianzong of the Wang family of Beihai went to Kunlun City, Flaming Fire, one of the 12 super masters of Samsara, also came to the top of Mount Taibai. The peak, which was nearly 3,000 meters high, was snow-white, magnificent and magnificent. Standing on the peak and overlooking the surroundings, one could see mountains covered in snow all year round. The white was quiet and peaceful, like a fairy tale kingdom, free of dirt and dust. It is indeed beautiful. It's even more beautiful than our headquarters. I just don't know what the future holds. Flaming Fire looked at the pure white snow and sighed softly. Are you thinking of your tribe again? A black figure stood beside Flaming Fire. He was slender and thin, and his whole body was shrouded in a large cloak. The hood of the cloak covered his face, making it impossible to see what he looked like. He stood quietly beside Flaming Fire with a long sword on his back. When he did not speak, he was like a strange shadow without any aura at all. But as he spoke, his whole body seemed to suddenly come to life, and there was suddenly a trace of extremely sharp sword intent all over him. His tone was soft and slow, but every word was like the sound of a long sword, showing off its sharpness. That's not a tribe. Flaming Fire's eyes were in a trance, but her tone was extremely calm. Standing in this place, it was indeed easy for her to think of the place she called home before she met the palace master. There was also dreamy white snow, a waterfall flowing down, and a cold pool that never froze all year round. But there was no laughter. That place was silent, solemn, and rigid, like a fake landscape painting. The deathly stillness was devoid of any vitality, unlike here. Even in this world of ice and snow, it was still full of vitality. The black figure chuckled, and the sword intent echoed around him. He reached out and pointed forward, saying slowly, "There are about 2 kilometers left. Just go straight." Flaming Fire nodded and stepped forward. She had just taken a step. A warm voice with a hint of a smile suddenly rang out. It was calm and gentle, sounding refined and courteous. "There is a forbidden area ahead. What are you doing here?" Flaming Fire stopped and raised her head. A snow-white figure stood quietly on a small snowy hill a few dozen meters in front of him. He had white hair and white clothes, and he wore a silver-white mask. It was as if he had blended in perfectly with the snowy ground. He stood motionless, as if he had been standing here for a long time, but also as if he had just appeared. At this moment, he seemed to have become a part of the wind and snow on the mountain. He was everywhere, but nowhere to be found. Flaming Fire's pupils contracted slightly, and for a moment, she felt that she could not lock on the figure in front of her. If they were fighting, she would not even have the chance to take the initiative to attack. The other party had completely integrated with the surrounding environment. Once he attacked, it would definitely be a matter of life and death. This was the fighting state of a top assassin. He did not move, but he would kill with one blow. Although the white figure opposite her spoke in a gentle tone, he was obviously ready to fight. Ahem! The black figure beside Flaming Fire suddenly coughed softly. In an instant, the dense sword intent broke out on the peak of Mount Taibai. The wind and snow were turbulent, the sword intent was like a dragon, and the sword energy was like a rainbow. In front of Flaming Fire, the seemingly real Snow White was broken like a mirror in the sword energy. The snow was still snow, and the white figure was still white. Everything became clear again. We are not enemies. For you. Before the white figure was about to attack, Flaming Fire took the initiative to speak. The white figure surrounded by wind and snow stared at the darkness in his sight. His eyes were solemn, but the smile on his face did not diminish. I'm Drifting Cloud from Sai City. How should I address you? Breeze. Drifting Cloud. They were the strongest assassin combination in Zhongzhou State. Both of them had the strength at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. They were known as the double walls of Sai City. Below the city lord, their individual strength might not be the strongest, but once they joined forces, they had the capital to be fearless. In the entire Sai City and even in the killer world, they were the real big shots. Flaming Fire nodded solemnly. Samsara, Flaming Fire. Drifting Cloud was slightly stunned. Before he could speak, the black figure continued, Samsara, Saint. Drifting Cloud's expressions suddenly became solemn. Saint and Flaming Fire. Although they were both among the 12 supermasters of Samsara, their status was absolutely different. There was no doubt about Flaming Fire's strength and status. But among the 12 supermasters, Saint was the first supermaster. His mysteriousness was second only to the Palace Lord, and even his strength was the same. Since such a figure visited Sai City had to treat him with caution. Especially in the case that Sai City and Samsara Palace had no interaction before, the two supermasters of Samsara Palace suddenly came here. What was their purpose? What can I do for you? Drifting Cloud's expression was solemn, but there was doubt in his tone. We have a letter, and we hope to hand it to Her Highness Hidden God in person. Flaming Fire said straightforwardly. A letter from Her Highness Palace Lord? Drifting Cloud asked attentively, and his tone became more and more solemn. The master of Samsara Palace was a mysterious figure in the whole dark world. Drifting Cloud did not think that she could have any interaction with his city lord. Thinking of everything that she had done in Billy State recently, Drifting Cloud seemed to have some speculations in his heart. Flaming Fire remained silent, showing an attitude of no comment. Drifting Cloud narrowed his eyes, adjusted the earphones around his ears, and whispered something. Then he said to Saint and Flaming Fire, please. No matter what the two supermasters of Samsara came here for, they were guests, and it was always inappropriate to keep them out. The three of them walked all the way in the snow. About 2 kilometers later, a vast hall covered with snow appeared in front of the three of them. The hall was magnificent, and the buildings, which imitated the style of ancient palaces, stretched out unevenly, looking elegant and solemn against the white snow. A small number of flowers and plants were planted in front of each palace, most of which Flaming Fire could not even name. The brightly colored flowers and plants took root in the snow, making the snow whiter and the flowers more beautiful. The world of ice and snow had its own style. Flaming Fire, who came to Sai City for the first time, looked calm. But looking at the palace in front of her and the snow in front of her, there was an indescribable shock in her heart. It was not obvious, but it did exist. She subconsciously glanced at Saint beside her. Saint was wrapped in a black cloak. He was calm, like a shadow floating beside her, and did not say a word. Flaming Fire shook her head slightly, took a deep breath, and followed Drifting Cloud all the way into the main hall of Sai City. The main hall was called Changbai, which complemented the Changbai Peak in the Taibai mountain range. The interior decoration was simple, and the space was large. 8 thick pillars carved with vivid patterns supported the roof. Under the extremely high ceiling, everyone inside felt extremely small. Inside the main hall, there were 2 rows of soft leather sofas arranged vertically. At the end of the sofas, there were several steps. Above the steps, there was a long soft cushion, which was obviously higher than the sofas below. A languid female figure leaned on the soft cushion behind, looking at Saint and Flaming Fire, who walked into the main hall with clear and indifferent eyes. Her figure was plump and soft, and she wore a loose robe. A golden mask covered most of her face, revealing only her sharp chin and beautiful lips. The woman's clear and indifferent eyes flashed, and she did not say a word. The sofas in the main hall were almost full of people. Roughly counting, there were about 30 of them. Each of them was dressed in snow white, with a mark of a golden mask embroidered on their chests. The mark was the size of a strawberry, shining magnificently in the soft light. Flaming Fire glanced around, keeping her composure. This was the Changbai Parliament of Sai City in Taibai Mountain, as well as the decision-making body of Sai City. In Sai City, Xianxia, the governor, had the highest decision-making and leadership power. But most of the time, she rarely took charge of things and even did not show up. Every day, she just accompanied the ice and snow of Changbai Peak and cultivated martial arts. In the case of Situ Tsangyue's silence, the 29 members of the Changbai Parliament were responsible for the daily operation of Sai City. In Sai City, which had less than 1,000 people, the 29 members could be said to be the real core of Sai City. The assassins of Sai City, the patriarchs of several wealthy families in the north, and the leaders of the special warfare system were all gathered together, and they controlled the highest voice of the special warfare system in the 3 provinces in the northeast of Zhongzhou State. Flaming Fire quietly looked at Situ Tsangyu on the soft couch. In that beautiful and lazy figure, she could only see endless confusion and loneliness. Among all the special warfare organizations in Zhongzhou State, Sai City could be said to be the most aloof one. For many years, they had stayed on the top of Taibai Mountain and controlled the overall situation of the special warfare in the northeast of Zhongzhou State. They did not expand, but they did not allow anyone to intervene. When something happened outside the northeast of Zhongzhou State, Sai City never took the initiative. Only when the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State made a clear request would they take action at once. After solving the problem, they did not ask for anything, but returned as soon as possible and continued to guard Taibai Mountain. As one of the special warfare giants of Zhongzhou State, the style of the whole Sai City was eccentric. They had no goals, no direction, and no desire, so that they were somewhat aloof from the government of Zhongzhou State. It was precisely because Sai City's aloof and desireless state was in line with the interests of many people that the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State decided to hand over Setting Sun, one of the 12 murderous weapons, to Sai City instead of Kunlun City. She was in the invincible realm, controlled Setting Sun, ranked on the divine list, and owned Sai City. Xianxia, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, had too many things. But such a hidden god gave Flaming Fire the feeling that she was really at a loss, so much so that she did not know what to do. That was a very numb and even a little dull attitude towards life. She was passive and decadent, muddling along. Flaming Fire was puzzled, but she was still polite on the surface. She even bowed slightly and said calmly, "Greetings, Your Highness Hidden God. Why are you here, Supermaster?" Xianxia, dressed in white, leaned lazily on the soft couch high above the main hall. Her tone was indifferent. "Here's a letter for Your Highness to read." Flaming Fire reached into her arms and took out an envelope. Situ Tsangyu waved her hand slightly. The air in front of Flaming Fire fluctuated. The weightless envelope in her hand suddenly rushed directly to Situ Tsangyu's tender white hand like a meteor. Flaming Fire's expression did not change. She stood there and waited. On the soft couch, Situ Tsangyu had opened the envelope and pulled out a page. The paper was obviously torn from a notebook, and it looked very irregular. There were only 11 words written on the pure white paper. The handwriting was delicate and elegant, and it was awe-inspiring. Desperate chase. 9 heavens bearing the wind. Li Tianlan. Sidu Tangyue's eyes flashed and she suddenly stood up. The paper in her hand turned into dust in an instant, fluttering in the air. Situ Tangyue's eyes shone brightly like never before. With her action, all the members of the Changbai parliament were completely focused. Where is he? Sidu Tangyue stared at Flaming Fire and asked. Sky Academy. Flaming Fire said lightly. What's the relationship between him and the palace master? Is the palace master in Zhongzhou state now? Sidu Tangyue continued to ask. At this moment, she seemed to have found her goal and direction. The powerful aura belonging to an invincible realm expert bloomed unscrupulously, grand and dazzling. The palace master is still in Billy state. My boss asked me to bring this letter to your highness. Flaming Fire told the truth in an old-fashioned tone. Boss? Sidu Tangyue raised her eyebrows slightly and felt a little puzzled. Yes, my boss. But this matter can represent the will of the palace master. I see. Sidu Tangyue sat back on the soft couch and looked at the scraps of paper still floating in the air thoughtfully. The scraps of paper in the air finally fell to the ground. Are you Saint? Sidu Tangyue's eyes flashed, and her gaze suddenly fell on the black shadow beside Flaming Fire. Take off your cloak. Everyone in the main hall was shaken. If they could see the face of the most mysterious first supermaster in Samsara, no one would want to miss it. Why don't you take off your mask? Saint was motionless. His tone was indifferent and fearless. Sidu Tangyue's bright and condensed eyes narrowed slightly and she snorted coldly. In the quiet hall, there was a sudden wind. It rushed straight to Saint's face. Saint took a step forward, reached out, and held the sword. The long sword on his back was suddenly unsheathed. There was a clanging sound between heaven and earth. In the hall, the swords of several experts rushed out of the sheath at the same time. The fierce clanging sound rushed out of the hall and echoed in the mountains. At the same time, it roared in everyone's heart. The sword intent was surging and growing endlessly. A smile gradually appeared in Sidu Tangyue's eyes. She whispered, "It's you." For a moment just now, she even suspected that this saint was the mysterious master of Samsara Palace. Now her guess was wrong, but it was not a loss to know the true identity of Saint. Saint loosened his hand holding the sword, and the clanging sound disappeared. He said calmly, "This sword is the sincerity of Samsara. Goodbye." He turned around and walked out of the hall. Flaming Fire followed him without saying a word. Outside the hall, the wind and snow were howling endlessly. In the hall, Sidu Tangyue looked at their backs silently and suddenly said, "Wait." She got up again. The whole hall fell into absolute silence in an instant. Sidu Tangyue's figure had rushed out of the hall. The endless wind and snow suddenly stopped. Only her figure moved forward in the white. Countless lifelike shadows drew a straight line behind her. The air was shaking violently, but there was silence between heaven and earth. Everything happened in an instant. Sidu Tangyue seemed to take only one step, but it also seemed to take many steps. When the shadows dissipated, she was already standing in front of Saint. Saint was motionless and even lowered his head, as if he was in deep thought. The indifference in Sidu Tangyue's eyes faded, and her eyes were gentle. She chuckled and said, "Samsara used your identity as a sincerity, and I used my martial arts as a sincerity. Did you see it clearly just now?" "Thank you." Saint was silent for a long time. Then he bowed slightly and said in a dignified tone, "I owe you a favor." Only he knew what that moment meant to him. That was the real desperate chase. It was Sidu Tangyue's body movement in the invincible realm. All the essence of this body movement seemed to be vividly displayed at that moment. For people like Saint, who had stepped into the half-step invincible realm and was only one step away from the real invincible realm, that moment was like a bright light in the dark, and its importance was self-evident. "We're on the same side. Why are you so polite?" Sidu Tangyue smiled indifferently. She glanced at Flaming Fire and continued, "Tell your boss that I will send someone to Sai City." "Is it drifting cloud or breeze?" Flaming Fire asked subconsciously. Judging from Situ Tsangyue's attitude, she could be sure that the person she sent to the Sky Academy this time was an absolute big shot in Sai City. The leader of the assassination course group of the Sky Academy seemed to be settled. Breeze? Drifting cloud? No matter which one of them went, it could be said that it was condescending to go there. It's neither. Situ Tsangyue turned around and said calmly, it's tribulation. Not only flaming fire, but even Saint was shocked and his face changed dramatically. Tribulation. The only deputy governor of Sai City. The strongest chi-controlling realm expert. The lunatic who tried to enter the invincible realm in the chi-controlling realm half a year ago. He could be said to be the only lunatic in Sai City whose reputation was comparable to Situ Tsangyue's. The Lord of Shadow in the Dark World. The #1 assassin in Zhongzhou State. Tribulation was not on the list of the top 10 contemporary experts in Zhongzhou State. But if Tribulation was determined to assassinate, all of the top 10 experts would be doomed except for the first 3. Saint took a deep breath and looked at Situ Tsangyue, who was already standing under the Changbai Palace. He said with a smile, she is really a great god. Zhuang Huayang will have a headache. Under the Changbai Palace, Situ Tsangyue did not look at the two leaving figures. She just looked up at the plaque hanging high in front of the palace and was lost in thought. Many years ago, the traitor who made Zhongzhou State suffer heavy losses and the man who made her life a success had personally inscribed 2 words on this plaque, Changbai. They knew each other until their hair turned white. But for many years, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, who had been feared by countless people, had always been alone, unattached, and had no one to rely on. Situ Tsangyue looked up at the plaque. Her expression was soft and her eyes were sad. Timbaimbe, if you are not here, who will I know in my life? For whom will I turn white? The chapter of nearly 6,000 words was posted late. Thank you, Yuan Yang, for the monthly ticket of Bodhi Fantasy Land. Chapter 74. Different from Sai City, which stood aloof from worldly affairs, as the power center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City paid attention to a majestic atmosphere in terms of scale and aura. It was also a city built in a world of ice and snow. The vast palaces of Sai City were the most conspicuous buildings. And Kunlun City was a real city. Kunlun City was located on the west side of the Kunlun mountain range, covering an area of dozens of square kilometers. It was built between Qingyun Peak and Linggu Peak, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. It was covered with snow all year round, but the scenery was not monotonous and the climate was not cold. It snowed all year round, the climate was pleasant, and the flowers were blooming all year round. The scenery was picturesque. This was Kunlun City, the most peculiar place in the entire Zhongzhou State. The sun was setting. When the sun was about to set, on the road on the east side of Qingyun Peak, 2 figures walked slowly in the overwhelming snow. A young man and a middle-aged man walked side by side. Looking from a distance, they were like 2 black spots in the snow. If one did not pay attention, one would easily ignore them. The young man's footsteps were steady and powerful, and he walked very fast. He walked in the snow that almost reached his knees as if he were walking on flat ground. His movements were natural. Every step he took had a feeling that his body was stretched to the extreme, as if it was made by nature. Not to mention his physical condition, at least people would feel comfortable at first glance. The middle-aged man followed him casually, neither hurriedly nor slowly, but always kept walking side by side with the young man. The snow in the valley was blowing with the wind, and it was cold. The middle-aged man in unlined clothes looked up at the seemingly endless snow in his sight, looking calm. Xianxia, can you hold on? He glanced at the young man beside him and said in a steady tone. Wang Tianzong had just broken through and was seriously injured. He came to the snow mountain from the desert in one day. Even if he knew that his son was talented, he seemed to be a little worried. I'm fine. Wang Xianxia said with a smile, and every expression showed joy from the bottom of his heart. As the top wealthy family in the world, the Wang family of Beihai was too big, and Wang Tianzong was too busy. Among the young people of the Wang family of Beihai, he could be said to be the one who spent the longest time with his father, but the longest time was actually very short. Ever since he was young, his invincible father had always been silent and quiet, like a mountain peak that everyone could only look up to. This time, from the ocean to the grassland, to the desert, and then to the snowy mountains, the father and son had been together day and night. It seemed that only at this time could he feel that his father's heart was very close to him, very close. He was no longer a young prodigy that others admired and valued. His father was no longer the invincible number one on the divine list and the leader of a wealthy family. It was simple and natural. Wang Xianxia enjoyed such a journey from the bottom of his heart. No matter how hard and tired it was, he didn't mind. Then hurry up. Wang Tianzong nodded and said in a calm tone. Wang Xianxia agreed. His pace became more rapid, and his body became more and more stretched. His every move was full of spiritual qi, revealing an almost flawless martial arts aura. Wang Tianzong still walked forward unhurriedly, but no matter how fast Wang Xianxia walked, he could always walk side by side with him. In a trance, he didn't seem to be moving forward, but just standing there quietly. The snow under his feet and the snow-capped peak in front of him were retreating rapidly according to his will. The invincible realm expert who ranked first on the divine list seemed to have returned to nature, but no matter where he stood, he seemed to be the center of the whole world. The snow under his feet was getting shallower and shallower. A tall stone tablet appeared in the snow. The black stone tablet was 10 meters high and 3 or 4 meters wide, heavy and heavy. A few bright red words were engraved on the stone tablet. In the white snow, the black and red color looked extremely strange and dazzling. In the military forbidden area ahead, idlers stopped. The handwriting was wild and sharp, and every stroke showed a kind of sharpness and elegance that seemed to be flying out. Wang Tianzong stood in front of the stone tablet, staring at the handwriting on it, and said softly, "The military forbidden area." Well, the military forbidden area. He shook his head, continued to move forward, and said calmly, "It's an eyesore." Wang Xianxia had already taken out the heavy and broad sword behind him. A dazzling electric light lingered in his blade. Wang Xianxia held the sword and chopped down. The blade rubbed against the stone tablet, and the flashing sparks flashed from top to bottom. Wang Xianxia turned around and continued to move forward. There was a loud bang behind him. The stone tablet, which was 10 meters high, collapsed into countless pieces in an instant. Large pieces of stone flew and eventually sank into the snow. "Dad, are you sure that Kunlun City sent someone to attack Yuetong?" Wang Xianxia, who had smashed the stone tablet, followed Wang Tianzong and asked softly, "I can only be sure that it was not done by Gu Xingyun." Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, the governor of Kunlun City, was also the top leader of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Of course, he had heard about the attack on his sister in Huading. If it was not done by Gu Xingyun, what did it have to do with Kunlun City? A good-for-nothing who can't even hang at the bottom of the holy list wants to rise to the top with a little cleverness. Idiot, it's ridiculous. Wang Tianzong twitched the corner of his mouth and said coldly, "Since they want me to come to Kunlun City so much, I'll come and have a look. If I don't follow their wishes, how can I catch their tail?" Wang Xianxia was silent and thoughtful. He knew very well who couldn't hang at the bottom of the holy list. Gu Qianchuan, the first elder of Kunlun City. Wang Tianzong could say that he was a good-for-nothing, but he was not qualified to say anything. He was known as a young heavenly son and had entered the thunder-shocking realm, but any invincible realm master still needed to be looked up to by him. Gu Qianchuan? He frowned and muttered to himself. In general, Kunlun City was generally harmonious. But according to his father, it seemed that Gu Qianchuan united with outsiders to seize power, and the attack on Yuetong was just one of the steps. When did the fight inside Kunlun City become so fierce? Wang Xianxia couldn't believe it. Gu Xingyun was so powerful that it was almost impossible for him to control the situation in Kunlun City. Just like the current Wang family of Beihai, there were conflicts and contradictions among the major branches and lineal descendants, But everything was under control. But Kunlun City, how long had it been rising? It had only been 20 years, and the internal contradictions were so fierce? How could it be possible? Wang Tianzong stopped talking. The snow under their feet became lighter and lighter. They could even see some plants and flowers, which were delicate and lovable against the white snow. Is this close to the dragon vein? Wang Xianxia whispered. Kunlun City was windy and snowy all the year round, but the flowers were blooming, and the city was as warm as spring. All of this was because of the dragon vein under Kunlun City. Wang Xianxia had heard some rumors. It was said that the dragon vein would move on its own, but the time and direction of movement were uncertain. The dragon vein of Kunlun City had existed as early as 50 years ago. What was more rare was that there were two rare earth veins where the dragon vein was located. It was the pattern of two dragons playing with a pearl. Because of this, the dragon vein stayed here for a longer time. But under normal circumstances, the dragon vein should have moved to another place 15 years ago, but it was locked here by Xianxia, the eccentric of Taoism. This lock lasted for 20 years, and it was also the beginning of Xianxuanzi's fame. Since then, people really regarded him as a metaphysics grandmaster who was as famous as Great Master Wei. The flowers were blooming here, and the temperature was gradually rising. It could be seen that they were not far from the dragon vein and Kunlun City. It's in front. Wang Tianzong's face was calm, but his tone was a little complicated. He whispered, "When I was a child, I learned swordsmanship here. There was no Kunlun City at that time. It was just a few thatched cottages. Things remain the same, but people have changed." He laughed at himself and whispered again, "Things remain the same, but people have changed." Wang Xianxia was silent. When his father was a child, at that time, there was no Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. There was only the war god family and the Li family. People said that where the Li family was, there must be a dragon vein. But in fact, where the dragon vein was, there must be a Li family. It was self-evident who his father had learned swordsmanship from. "Let's go." Wang Tianzong continued to move forward and looked up. Through the howling wind and snow. At the end of his sight, the outline of a city had gradually become clear from blurred. The setting sun on the horizon was trying its best to burn the last of its afterglow. The sky that was vaguely covered by the snow-capped peaks was a fiery red. The brilliant light sprinkled on the snow-capped ground, giving off an orange-yellow color. In his line of sight, the blizzard city between the two snow-capped peaks seemed to be glowing, revealing a kind of grand magnificence and majesty. The temperature in Wang Xianxiao's eyes gradually decreased, and he slightly sped up his pace. The retro city walls and city towers were getting closer and closer. Wang Xianxiao could even see the two teams of soldiers standing outside the city gate who were in charge of guarding. The soldiers were lined up neatly, with serious and indifferent faces and loaded guns. They were guarding the city in the icy and snowy environment. Such a military appearance could be said to have high morale. Wang Xianxiao gently moved his body, and the snowflakes and dampness all over his body disappeared in an instant. "Stop!" At the city gate, some soldiers finally noticed the two travelers who were walking in the wind and snow. Everyone's body tightened almost instinctively, and the guns in their hands were slightly tightened. Although the muzzles were not pointed at Wang Tianzong and Wang Xianxiao, the solemn killing intent had begun to brew. "What are you doing? This is Kunlun City. It's the forbidden area of Zhongzhou State. Don't you see the stone tablet?" The two teams of soldiers rushed over neatly, and a captain with the rank of captain shouted angrily, "Your stone tablet is of poor quality, and I broke it." Wang Tianzong glanced at him and said in a cold tone, "How dare you?" The captain sneered, but before he went on, he saw Wang Tianzong's eyes sweep over. His eyes were not so fierce or domineering, but ordinary. But under this glance, the captain suddenly lost all his courage. He opened his mouth, but could not make any sound for a while. "Who the hell are you?" The captain's heart beat wildly for no reason. He took a deep breath and asked in a deep voice. Wang Tianzong did not speak, but looked up at the city tower above the city gate silently. Wang Xianxiao, who was carrying a huge sword, also said nothing. In the wind and snow, outside the city gate, the atmosphere suddenly became oppressive and cold. "You can't enter the city." A drop of cold sweat flowed down the captain's forehead. He was loyal to his duty. Although his voice was dry, he still insisted to say, "If you want to enter the city, I have to report." "I won't enter the city." Wang Tianzong finally said slowly, "This so-called city is too small. I just come to have a look, and let you have a look by the way." "Look at what?" The captain was stunned and said subconsciously, "Look at the sword." Wang Tianzong said softly. With his voice, the sky above the entire Kunlun city suddenly twisted violently. The sword intent, which was so grand that it almost filled the whole world, gathered. The afterglow of the setting sun was still dim, but the sky above Kunlun city had changed. At this moment, almost everyone in Kunlun city went out of their homes and looked up at the sky. The temperature outside the city was dropping rapidly. In everyone's horrified eyes, a huge sword with a length of thousands of meters and a width of hundreds of meters had been completely formed. The sky above the city was still changing. The air was compressed. The incredible sword, which was almost beyond everyone's imagination, became more and more solid, like ice crystals. The huge sword crossed the sky and turned slightly. The sword energy was in Jojo. The wind and clouds surged, and the whole city seemed to be shaking slightly. "Gu Qianchuan, come out to see me." Wang Tianzong spoke slowly, but his voice shook the sky. His calm and cold voice rang in the ears of everyone in Kunlun city. Everyone's heart was filled with despair. "Stop!" A frightened shout rang out. A skinny figure dashed out of the city gate at lightning speed. Wang Tianzong glanced at him, expressionless. When the skinny figure rushed out of the city gate saw Wang Tianzong, his expression changed wildly. His original anger had completely disappeared, leaving only fear. His voice trembled and was almost out of shape, but he still persisted and asked, "Your Majesty? What does this mean?" "Your Majesty." In the dark world, every invincible realm expert could be called His Highness, which was people's respect for invincible realm experts. But the word, "Your Majesty," was unique. It only belonged to the Wang family of Beihai and the Sword Emperor of Zhongzhou State. "How dare you talk to me?" Wang Tianzong looked at the skinny figure in front of him and said calmly, "Where is Gu Qianchuan?" "First Elder just left for Huading," the skinny old man said in a trembling voice. His code name was Skeleton, and he was a famous expert in Zhongzhou State. But in front of Wang Tianzong, he didn't even have the courage to speak loudly. Wang Tianzong frowned slightly and moved. The next second he appeared on the city gate tower. The giant sword in the air trembled slightly, and the majestic sword intent poured out crazily. The whole Kunlun city was filled with cold sword energy. "Your Majesty, please be merciful." "Why on earth?" Skeleton was scared out of his wits. He stood at the foot of the city and howled in despair. "Why?" Wang Tianzong smiled and said softly, "Nothing. I just don't like you." He paused and then said, "Kneel down." The whole city was dead silent. No one knelt down and no one dared to move. Wang Tianzong narrowed his eyes slightly. The giant sword in the sky shook violently and turned over instantly. Boom! Under Wang Tianzong, the city gate tower collapsed instantly. The 1,000-meter-long giant sword stood upright and rotated in the air, pointing straight at the ground. Wang Tianzong's body was suspended in the air, expressionless, like a god, ruling the world. The skeleton's face was full of fear. He bent his waist, bent his knees, and unconsciously knelt on the ground. His face was blood red, but his knees did not move. He lowered his head and said, "Your Majesty, please forgive me." As he knelt down, all the soldiers in front of the city gate finally knelt down. Then it was in the city, one after another. On this day, under the Sword Emperor's giant sword, the whole Kunlun city knelt down. None of the tens of thousands of elites in the city had pride. Wang Tianzong stood in the air and looked at the people of Kunlun city kneeling all over the city. He narrowed his eyes and whispered to himself, "This is the posture you should have." His figure flashed, and the next second he had carried Xianxia away. In the wind and snow, the figures of the father and son were getting smaller and finally became two black spots. The wind and snow filled Kunlun City. After a long time, the first skeleton who knelt down finally raised his head. At the same time, the 1,000-meter-long giant sword that had not dissipated above fell straight down. No! Skeleton's eyes turned red in an instant. Boom! The condensed giant sword fell to the ground in an instant, and the whole city shook violently. The city wall, the city gate, and countless buildings cracked and collapsed one after another, like a landslide and the sky falling. One sword destroyed the city. Chapter 75. Old Master Dongqing asked Li Tianlan to live in Dongqing Rushi's place, but in fact, it was Dongqing Wudi's. The Dongqing clan, which occupied the mountain as the king, was extraordinary. But in fact, there were only 6 villas on the big mountain. To put it bluntly, there were 6 families. These 6 families supported the most important branches of the Dongqing clan. No matter from which angle, there was a kind of prosperity, like a towering tree, unattainable. Dongqing Wudi's villa was close to the top of the mountain. In terms of height, it was second only to Old Master Dongqing's main villa, and the size was basically the same. Li Tianlan didn't feel anything at first, but when Dongqing Qiuqi took him into a very large bedroom on the 3rd floor and smelled the fresh and elegant fragrance inside, he finally felt something was wrong. Sure enough, Dongqing Qiuqi told him clearly that this was Dongqing Rushi's bedroom and that it was the old master's idea. Li Tianlan was really in a dilemma. At the same time, he couldn't figure out why the old master was so anxious. Looking at his posture, it seemed that he couldn't wait to put Dongqing Rushi in his bed immediately. He was so anxious that Li Tianlan even felt a little absurd. If the Li family was still at its peak, Li Tianlan could understand what the Dongqing clan did, even though it was beneath their dignity. After all, with the status of the Li family at that time, many rich and powerful families would like to be tied to the Li family and use their granddaughters as bargaining chips. Many people would do such a thing. But now it was different. The Li family had long been in decline. Although Li Tianlan had entered the secular world, in the face of the extremely complicated situation in Zhongzhou State, no one dared to say that the Li family had a chance to rise. No one was even sure whether Li Tianlan could grow up. Under normal circumstances, at this time, even if the Dongqing clan would not deny it to deal with him, they would at least quickly cut off relations with him and let the marriage contract be invalid. If there was really such a situation, Li Tianlan could completely understand it and he would not resent anything. Every man for himself would be destroyed by heaven and earth. His identity was a bomb. If he got involved with it, he might face endless hostility. What kind of behemoths were the Prince Group and Kunlun City? How deep-rooted was the Wang family of Beihai? Even if these were not mentioned, which of the family members of the 120,000 soldiers who were wiped out at the border with their father's treason did not hate the Li family to the bone? Now that so many years had passed, no one could be sure where some of the outstanding family members were. Once his identity was exposed, there would be countless opponents in the open and in the dark. No matter how strong the Dongqing clan was, they could not cope with it, and even risked being completely torn apart by the general trend. Their refusal to acknowledge the engagement was, at best, a means of self-protection. It had nothing to do with being noble or despicable. Li Tianlan was too lazy to resent anything. He had long been ready to give up the engagement. But when he came to the Dongqing clan, everything was King wrong. Not only did the Dongqing clan not intend to break the engagement, but they also couldn't wait for him to marry Dongqing Rushi. The old master's attitude was simply impatient. He directly sent him to Dongqing Rushi's bedroom. Li Tianlan felt helpless but also a little lucky. Fortunately, Dongqing Rushi retreated in advance. Otherwise, the old master would really make an absurd move of letting him sleep with Dongqing Rushi tonight. He had just tasted Qin Wei Bai, and it was time for him to taste the relationship between a man and a woman. At that time, if he really slept with Dongqing Rushi, it was really hard to say whether Li Tianlan could control himself. Li Tianlan instinctively wanted to change the room, but was refused. After Dongcheng Qiuqi left, he hesitated and sat on the bed. After calling Qin Weibai, he was in a daze silently. A woman's boudoir should be the type of fresh, romantic, or lovely, but what Li Tianlan could feel here was only coldness and gloom. The light gray walls were full of cold metal texture. The furnishings in the room were simple and monotonous. The bed was big, soft, and comfortable, but from the bedsheet to the bedside table, it was all black, without any pattern, looking old-fashioned and solemn. In front of the window was a simple and generous desk, also in a cold color. Several books were placed neatly on the desk. Only a photo frame on the desk could give people a little warm feeling. It seemed to be a family photo many years ago. Dongcheng Wudi was holding two very young daughters, smiling freely. A young woman who looked very kind to Li Tianlan put her arms around Dongcheng Wudi's neck from the side, looking very happy. Li Tianlan silently looked at the family photo, his body slowly lying on the bed, his expression calm. The elegant fragrance slowly floated into Li Tianlan's nostrils, filling his sense of smell. Different from Qin Weibai's natural richness, and different from Wang Yuedong's fragrance and freshness, it was a very elegant and quiet smell, leaving a deep impression. Li Tianlan closed his eyes. He was a little sleepy, but he couldn't fall asleep for a while. His mind was full of the Dongcheng clan. He always felt that whether it was Dongcheng Hongguang, Dongcheng Wudi, or even Thunder God, there was something wrong with the way they looked at him this time, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. The Dongcheng clan was too warm to him, so warm that it even made him a little uneasy. Dongcheng Qiuqi was relatively more natural, but that was because she regarded him as her future brother-in-law. Li Tianlan didn't get in touch with other people in the Dongcheng clan, but just the few people he had met so far gradually made him feel a little overwhelmed. Kindness? He believed that the Li family's kindness to the Dongcheng clan existed, but it was definitely not the main reason why the Dongcheng clan was so warm. Any kindness was not enough for the whole Dongcheng clan to accept him at the risk of the destruction of the whole clan. If he was just an ordinary person with a declining family, it was understandable that the Dongcheng clan was willing to fulfill the engagement because of the kindness of the past. But behind the Li family's loneliness was probably the biggest political storm in Zhongzhou state in the past 2 decades. If he was with Dongcheng Rushi, once his identity was exposed, the whole Dongcheng clan would become the first target of countless people. Dongcheng Hongguang knew this, but even so, he insisted on marrying his granddaughter to him. With such a resolute attitude, if it was only because of the kindness of the past and the engagement, Li Tianlan would believe it even if he was a fool. What was the purpose behind the series of actions of the Dongcheng clan? What value did he have that he hadn't discovered yet? The Dongcheng clan, which was unbelievably enthusiastic, was it an enemy or a friend? Li Tianlan's imagination ran wild, and he finally fell asleep in a daze. After an unknown period of time, there was a gentle knock on the door, and Dongcheng Qiuqi's gentle voice sounded outside the door. "Tianlan, are you awake?" Instead of relaxing because of the enthusiasm of the Dongcheng clan, Li Tianlan, who was more vigilant, immediately sat up and answered. He washed his face in the bathroom of the bedroom and opened the door. "They're still at Grandpa's. It's just the 2 of us at noon. I made lunch. Would you like to have some?" Dongcheng Qiuqi stood at the door and said softly with a smile. Li Tianlan nodded and said casually, "Sister Qiuqi, do you live here too?" "I just moved out last year, and now I live with my wife on this mountain. The villa at the bottom is my home," Dongcheng Qiuqi said softly. It could be seen that she had a good relationship with her husband. When she mentioned her husband, she smiled sweetly. "What does brother-in-law do? A soldier?" Li Tianlan followed Dongcheng Qiuqi downstairs and asked with a chuckle. "He works in Luojing. He's the mayor of Luojing. He's very capable. Uncle Zhou said that the Zhou family will count on him to take over in the future." Dongcheng Qiuqi's gentle and beautiful eyes glanced at Dongcheng Qiuqi and said meaningfully, "Even if it's an alliance marriage, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I have a good relationship with your brother-in-law, right?" Li Tianlan was stunned. He knew that she had heard from the old master that he had some resistance to the engagement. Was she here for work? The Zhou family? He knew little about the current six. The Zhou family seemed to be the backbone of the giant group. Together with the Dongqing clan and the Bai family, they formed the three giants of the giant group. All the voices of the giant group were basically made by these three giants. Dongqing Qiuqi marrying the heir of the Zhou family was mutually beneficial for both sides. It was also a good ending for Dongqing Qiuqi herself. Luojing was one of the sub-provincial cities in Zhongzhou state. It had just been applied for a few years ago. The heir of the Zhou family could become the mayor of Luojing and had a bright future. In contrast, although Dongqing Qiuqi was at the same level as her husband, there was no doubt that the eldest son of the Zhou family had a better future. Sister Qiuqi, I agree with you. I'm honored and even a little happy that the Dongqing clan thinks highly of me. But I have a girlfriend. I said I would marry her, and I have to do it. Li Tianlan smiled helplessly. Your girlfriend is Little Bai? Dongqing Qiuqi suddenly asked. Her tone was playful and a little strange. Li Tianlan suddenly remembered that Qin Weibai had once told him that she was best friends with a core figure of the Dongqing clan. Could it be Dongqing Qiuqi? The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He nodded and said again, I will marry her. Dongqing Qiuqi giggled and walked downstairs quickly. Silly boy, even a married lady like me is tempted by a figure like Little Bai, let alone a man. It's hard to say whether she will marry you or not. Li Tianlan didn't agree with this, but he wouldn't refute it. He went to the dining room and sat down. Looking at the exquisite dishes on the table, he took a bite and said with a smile, It tastes good. Rushi's cooking is much better than mine. If you like it, let her cook for you in the future. Dongqing Qiuqi tried hard to promote her sister. Li Tianlan looked a little embarrassed. He ate and didn't say anything. Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and stopped talking about this topic. Some things needed to be done slowly. Being too impatient would only be counterproductive. As a senior political official, Dongqing Qiuqi had a perfect grasp of the situation. When you were sleeping, I went downtown to buy you clothes. I didn't know what size you would wear, so I bought one for each size. Try it on later. After dinner, the old master said he would take you to the ancestral hall to burn incense. Dongqing Qiuqi picked up a mouthful of food and said softly. Li Tianlan subconsciously looked at his clothes. He went out in a hurry almost as soon as he got off Qin Weibai's body last night. As a result, Dongqing Wudi was even more anxious than him. He didn't even give him time to change clothes and directly took him to the Dongqing clan. After traveling thousands of miles, he was still in the moon-white silk pajamas. Li Tianlan didn't realize anything before. Now looking at his clothes again, he suddenly felt like a fool. Thank you. He rubbed his nose and didn't refuse. Not everyone had the courage to parade around in his pajamas. Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and didn't speak. Li Tianlan silently lowered his head to eat, but he was thinking about Dongqing Qiuqi's words. The old master would take him to the ancestral hall to burn incense? It seemed that he was really determined to pull him into the Dongqing clan. He frowned slightly. He just felt that it was more and more difficult to see the Dongqing clan's meaning. This was an era where everything was covered by countless appearances and grotesqueness. Good and evil, right and wrong, it seemed that everything could be covered with a seemingly beautiful coat. People's hearts were unpredictable. People's hearts were unpredictable. Why was the Dongqing clan so anxious? These days, he was thinking about whether to change the update time. You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.